City Clerk, do we need to read a notice?
Yes.
Why don't we do that? Why don't we do that now, and we'll convene the meeting of the Laramie City Council for April 7th, 2021. City Clerk.
Notice is hereby given that a special meeting of the Laramie City Council will be held Wednesday, April 7th, 2021 at 6:00 p.m. via Zoom webinar, ID number 862-2156-2102, passcode 811980, through City Hall Council Chambers, 406 Ivanson Avenue, Laramie, Wyoming, for the following purpose. Number 1, Resolution 2021-18, creating the ad hoc working group for police and community.
Thank you very much. And we will do the roll call, and then we'll do the Pledge of Allegiance, and then we'll get right into the business matter. Can we have a roll call?
Cumbie.
Here.
Gabriel.
Here.
Harrington.
Here.
O'Doherty.
Here.
Schuster.
Here.
Stelter.
Here.
Somerville.
Here.
Pierce.
Here.
Weaver.
Here.
That's 9 present and 0 absent, Your Honor.
9 present. All right. Thank you very much. If you'd all please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
To the
republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Members of the council, we have one item on our special meeting agenda. We have had a considerable amount of public comment. We've tried to make sure that we accommodated public comment on this item. What I'd like to do is get right into our work process this evening. We have not placed an item of non-agenda item public comment for this. We had a meeting last night with 2 times available for non-agenda related public comment. So I believe we want to get into this, and there is I believe amendment proposals from members of the council that we're going to discuss, and we will take public comment on those items as we go through. I don't remember, council members, who introduced this last time. Council member O'Doherty is indicating.
I think it was me.
All right. Council member O'Doherty, unless you have an objection, I think I'll have you introduce it for the second time.
I move to approve Resolution 2021-18, creating an ad hoc working group for police and community, and authorize the mayor and clerk to sign.
Second.
So a motion and a second from Council member Harrington. I think had it just a second before, or his internet connection is just a little bit faster than the vice mayor's, one or the other. It's been moved and seconded. And I'm going to turn it over to council members for discussion or amendments, as it may be. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If you feel it's appropriate, I will walk through my amendment at this time.
Yes, Councilmember Somerville, do that. And please provide us an explanation a little bit about the process that we're using. And I'm going to go to the city clerk.
Are we going to do that in a form of a motion before we? Thank you.
Yes, thank you, city clerk. Yes, we are. Councilmember O'Doherty.
Was the city manager going to introduce the Q&A, or is that happen later or not at all?
Yeah. Councilmember O'Doherty, nothing has changed about this resolution since the last time it was introduced by city staff. So I think by way of staff input, that will happen for the amended resolution that I believe Councilor Somerville is going to introduce. So unless there's an objection, I think it's not really appropriate to open it up for Q&A because we need to see which resolution we're going to be talking about, because I believe Councilmember Somerville's intention is to introduce a substitute resolution through an amendment, through a motion to amend by substitution. Does that make sense? Do we need to have discussion about that? Councilmember Somerville, would you like to give the city manager an opportunity before you make the motion? I think it's probably more procedurally correct to make the motion and then get into this discussion, and the city management folks can give us their feedback at that point. All right. And what I was going to say, Councilmember Somerville, is if you could please explain the procedure a little bit about amending through substitution, because I'm going to imagine that there's not a total 100% amount of familiarity with that with members of the public, or not even with the council. I don't always remember everything about it. So, Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So to start off with the process of amending by substitution, the intent here is that I had a number of pieces of the resolution that I wanted to amend. And instead of doing this one at a time, the substitution amendment will allow us to consider all of the changes in one amendment motion and one discussion. So procedurally, I think it's just a little cleaner than trying to track all the amendments and the changes as we go through one at a time. So with that, Mr. Mayor, I would move to substitute resolution 2021-18B as provided to the city council for resolution 2021-18.
I'll second.
Motion and a second by Vice Mayor Pierce. Councilmember Somerville, I'm going to turn it over to you to go through this. I wanted to make sure that we took a minute. All right, I think we have the substitute resolution up on the screen for sharing now. Public, members of the public, I'd ask you to please direct your attention to that. I'll ask the city clerk to try to zoom in on that a little bit so that we can enlarge the document. And Councilmember Somerville, over to you.
Mr. Mayor. And just for clarity on procedure, how you would like me to go about this, would you like me to ask council if they have any questions as we kind of go through each change, or just at the end we can open it up to any questions for the entire document at that point?
Member of the council, what I'd like to do is give Councilmember Somerville an opportunity to explain the proposed resolution holistically, and then we can go through individual questions about individual pieces and take public comment. After that, then we'll go back to council for further discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, council members, I appreciate your consideration of this substitution amendment. I'm just going to walk kind of paragraph by paragraph in the document that the city clerk is screen sharing. I believe all of the changes are highlighted. We'll make sure that that's the case. So the first change is a simple change in the second whereas paragraph, where it says on February 23rd, 2021, city manager, city attorney, and it said and chief, where I'm asking to add police chief for clarity there. As we move down, the next changes come under the purpose under section 1. So in the fourth sentence at the very end, currently the resolution says within 12 months of the first meeting, the working group will provide recommendations. I would like to change that to 6 months of the first meeting, the working group will provide recommendations to city leadership. Just a reason behind that request is that I think that we've had considerable discussion. We've had some good research presented to us by staff, and a lot of good dialogue with the community so far. And I feel that we can probably move this along within the 6 months. And at the end of 6 months, if we feel like they need more time to do their work, we can certainly extend it. But I don't want to kind of belabor the point if they can do the work quicker. The next change is under bullet point A. Currently it says investigate data. I'm asking to change that to review. I think that's a more appropriate purpose for the committee to review the data, evidence, and available resources. The next change is under point B. And under point B, at the end of the sentence, which ends in priorities of the community, I'm asking to add the language, including potential mental health programs to assist law enforcement. I think after reviewing the conversations from last summer and the resolution that was passed by the City Council, the mental health component of this has gotten a little lost in the conversation. And I know that the chief has expressed sincere interest in continuing to improve. Currently we do CIT training, but to continue to improve upon those types of resources to assist his department in doing their job well. And I'd like to support the police department in that. The next change comes under item F. Currently, this says that the working group will host at least one community forum. And I apologize, there's a typo on the document that I sent. The one should be stricken from that. We want to change that to host at least 3 community forums facilitated by an impartial third party. And then we're going to add with minutes made available to the public of that meeting. I think that this helps just bring more opportunity for the community to engage in this topic, and also gives us an opportunity for some additional community education from both sides of the issue. I think that's important. Under item G is the next recommended change. This bullet point would require that the city provide an email address to receive citizen comments through email that could be then sent to the committee. It would also require that the city publishes via the city website updates as the working group progresses, so that our citizens can kind of remain apprised of the efforts. I think that this particular addition, for those of you that were on council before, or maybe even community members, the last time we did something like this, I believe during my tenure, was when the 15th Street issue came up. And I think we found that providing an email address for our residents to comment really helped to kind of streamline those comments and allowed everybody to take those in. So I think that process worked well before, and I think it could work well for us this time. The next item is item H. The City Council will provide a professional facilitator to conduct meetings. I think this is an important addition to making these meetings, this working group, constructive. The emotions are very powerful on both sides of the committee, or excuse me, on both sides of the issue. I've certainly heard that as a City Council member. And again, I think if we want it to be productive, it would help to have a professional facilitator. For the council, we would need to, if this resolution passes, when the city manager brings that, we may need to amend the budget, but I do believe that our council travel budget will more than cover the cost for a professional facilitator, as we haven't expended those funds. The next item on there is that the working group will provide regular updates to the Laramie City Council. I left this intentionally vague in terms of what those updates need to be and how often they need to come. I don't want to set for the working group kind of their timeline as they progress through these issues, but I do think it's important that they're giving us updates in terms of where they're at and what they're working on. The next change in the amendment is under the nominating committee. So currently it holds 5 members of the nominating committee. I'm recommending 2 changes. The first is that number 2 is currently the municipal chief operating officer. I felt it was important to have one of the council members on the nominating committee. And as you'll see below, I've added the mayor to the actual working group. So I thought it was appropriate to include the vice mayor on the nominating committee to represent council. And then the second change is it currently says a representative from the faith community. I was at a little bit of a loss in terms of how we choose that representative from the faith community because there's a lot of different perspectives. I added the police chaplain just because that's somebody who is familiar with the issues, but also I think could represent the faith community very well. The next change for consideration comes under the institutional representation category. This is a pretty simple change. Under the line where it says one member from the Albany County Mental Health Licensing Board, I'm requesting that we add who is a licensed mental health provider. That's not somebody that we've added to the committee. And again, I think the mental health perspective, those programs and services are important to the conversation in terms of providing tools to our law enforcement officers and supporting the police department. The next change for consideration is the under the current police oversight representation. Currently, it calls for a member of the Civil Service Commission, appointed by the Civil Service Commission. I'm asking that the council change that to the mayor and president of the city council. The reason for that is I feel pretty strongly that the mayor, as our council elected leader, needs to serve on this committee. However, the Civil Service Commission is only a 3-person body, so we can't have the mayor and another Civil Service Commission member on there without constituting a quorum, which we know we can't do. So I think it makes sense to have the mayor on that committee in both his role as leadership, but also in the role of representing the Civil Service Commission and being familiar with those procedures and processes that go through that committee. The next change for consideration is on the liaison representation. I'm requesting that we add 2 liaisons. One is offering to a liaison position to the Albany County Sheriff and offering a liaison position to the University of Wyoming Police Chief. While I understand they haven't been approached and asked if they'd like to participate with this working group, I think while we're dealing with kind of looking at the Laramie Police Department, I think it's hard to have the conversation in a vacuum, considering how many law enforcement agencies we have in Laramie that are operating. And I certainly think that those representations are important. The next change is just a clarification to reflect above that the working group will meet not less than monthly for 6 months instead of 12. That would align with the December 1st reporting date. And then under the anticipated schedule, I have modified that both to recognize that we're doing this special meeting a little later than we had anticipated, but also, again, highlighting that recommendations are due to the city council, city leadership by December 1st, 2021. With that, Mr. Mayor, I would happily answer any questions.
Thank you, Councilor Somerville. I wonder if we might now, as Councilmember O'Doherty mentioned earlier, turn it over a little bit of our time this evening to the city manager to discuss the Q&A also, so that as we get into questions, we're talking about all of these things in an integrated way. Is there any objection? City manager, would you do that for us now? And also, I would ask if you could also weigh in from the management perspective about whether or not any of the proposed amendments impact any of the planning from the management perspective in terms of the way that we wanted to move forward with this if we do pass this resolution. And you can do that in whichever order you find appropriate, if you would, please. City Manager, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Good evening. I did provide a Q&A to hopefully make some clarifications for the public as to what the resolution does and does not include. As I've seen the resolution by substitution from Councilor Somerville, I believe these question and answer documents remain intact because the kind of substance of the work of the committee is unchanged in the resolution as substituted. So I will kind of go through these, and maybe the clerk would like to share that screen as well. Starting off with the first question, and this is built off of public input that we have received over the last month or so, literally up until moments before the meeting, with the attempt to address questions and also correct misperceptions or misinformation in the public. So the first question is, well, what does oversight mean and what does it include? Oversight really is a general term that may include a whole spectrum of activities from the direct day-to-day legal and managerial responsibility for operating and personnel management policies that is performed by your police chief, your city manager, your city attorney. Oversight could also or does also include the oversight that you exercise as elected officials in providing stewardship over all city services, policing included. And oversight could be used in a general sense and in the way that I think most of the comments you've received from the public have used it. And that general way is that residents or citizens and visitors to Laramie who are the beneficiaries of our policing services can provide oversight in the form of public opinion and providing perspectives to the city and to its leadership and to its employees about the services we provide and how we're doing that. So the next question is, will the ad hoc committee perform oversight of the police department? And the simple and clear answer is no. The ad hoc committee that is proposed in the resolution in front of you and in the substitution resolution, as recommended by me, will not have any authority whatsoever to exercise any form of oversight over the Laramie Police Department during the time that committee exists. Next question, is it appropriate for police officers to sit on a working group like the ad hoc working group that you're talking about tonight? And I'll tell you, in preparing for this meeting, I did look at dozens and dozens of these kinds of groups, ranging from strict citizen oversight boards to more informal and temporary ad hoc committees like what you're looking at tonight. And I will tell you, it is not uncommon at all for police officers to participate on working groups like what is in front of you this evening, particularly where the purpose of that working group is to engage in education, providing information to the public, and engaging in community relations to build trust with the community and the people we serve. Although there are often limitations on how many members of law enforcement would serve even on an advisory body or an ad hoc committee like you're talking about tonight. Clearly, if we want to talk about citizen oversight boards, which we are not talking about tonight, it is much less common for officers to serve on an oversight board, but that is not our topic this evening. Then the next question is the opposite of that. If it's okay, is it okay for officers to serve? And then by contrast, is it appropriate for citizen laypersons to sit on working groups like what you're discussing tonight? And again, as I reviewed dozens of these structures across the country, yes, it is common practice across the United States for residents who are lay people to participate in their local government and to have input on all of the services that the city provides, and that includes policing. No different than we have a Parks and Recreation Advisory Board. There are all across the country dozens and dozens of examples of citizens serving on advisory bodies for police departments and for policing services. In that capacity, what your residents often do is they're going to review policing actions. They're going to review policies. That doesn't mean they make policy, but they may review those policies in tandem with the chief and other officials of the city. What does that do? Well, it helps them to gain understanding, and then sometimes they can provide advice back to professional management and to your elected officials. But those citizen oversight boards or citizen review boards or citizen working groups do not supplant the professional management and the elected officials' role in local government. So what will the ad hoc committee before you tonight do if you approve it? As I think everybody knows, ad hoc groups are really temporary in nature, thus the name, and they have to complete an assigned task in a predetermined amount of time. So the ad hoc group that's proposed in Resolution 2021-18 first will become educated and knowledgeable about our municipal policing practices and policies. I originally proposed 12 months. Of course, your resolution by substitution offers 6 months. And at the end of that 6 months, after really coming to understand what the Laramie Police Department does and does not do, then they will come forward with some advice, purely advice, to city leadership about community values, needs, priorities for policing, ways, solutions, and methods that we could use if we're not already to meet the values and needs of the community, how best we might build understanding and effective communication and trust between the police department and community members, and then also advice about how to build transparency and accountability. There have been a lot of comments with concern about this ad hoc committee making policy for the police department. So that's your next question. Will they make policy? As currently on the table for your decision tonight, no, absolutely no. They will not make policy for the City of Laramie Police Department. The resolution doesn't grant any form of policy-making authority, and all policy-making for the City Police Department will continue as it currently is under the direction of City Council, City Management, and Police Management. Next question, how will the city enact the recommendations of the ad hoc group? Well, as with any advisory body, and as you know, City Council, we have some 14 advisory boards and commissions. This would just be one more that would look at policing. All recommendations of this group, like our other advisory groups, will be first reviewed by professional staff to determine if they're legally permissible and appropriate. And thereafter, then they would be considered by you, the governing body. The city would have sole discretion to enact any of the recommendations or to not enact any of the recommendations of this ad hoc group. And then the last question is, will the ad hoc committee lead to the formation of an oversight board? I put this question there because so many of the comments that we've received, both for citizen oversight and against citizen oversight, have alleged that this ad hoc committee is some first step toward oversight. And I will only speak for myself in having made this recommendation to you. But as I envision the ad hoc committee, the answer is no. The ad hoc committee is not a first step leading toward the formation of an oversight board. There's no predetermined or dictated outcome within the resolution. And I honestly have no idea what the recommendations of the ad hoc group might be. Once they become more familiar with the operations of our police department, they very well may feel like I do, that we have stellar leadership in the police department and we have a shining example in our police department of a group of very dedicated professionals. And they may say we don't need any additional oversight beyond the oversight we already have in our governance structure. Or they may feel differently. I don't know, but I want to assure you all, and certainly the members of the public, that my intention with forming this ad hoc committee is to build trust, to address any concern that any resident has about policing and safety, and that is the sole focus of all of it. So I appreciate the time. If there are any other questions, I'd be happy to take those. With respect to the resolution that's been offered by substitution, the only concern that I have, I think a lot of what Councilor Somerville has suggested are logistics type issues and easily addressable. I will say that I think the Chief and I both share a concern about involving other executive police managers around the community. While I certainly understand the reason that you might want to involve the sheriff and the police chief from the campus agency, there is some concern in that we have tried to tailor this ad hoc committee to look solely at municipal activities, at city policing. The reason being, we don't have the expertise to tell those other departments how to operate. And then by contrast, if we invite those agencies and their executive police heads to participate in this group, will that confuse the matter for the public? So I have some consternation there. I would ask for Chief Stalder to weigh in and give him the opportunity, Mayor, if you're okay, to address that issue as well, if he would like to.
Yes, absolutely. And Chief Stalder, if you're on the call, and I see that you are, if you have anything you want to add to this discussion for the council, please do that.
Mayor and council, as the city manager and myself am the assistant chief worked through the recommendation to put in front of you for the ad hoc committee, we kicked around whether county officials should be on it. As each of you know, over the course of the last year and really 2+ years, the focus of ACOP and others have been on the involvement of the Albany County Sheriff's Office with the fatal shooting of Robbie Ramirez in November of 18. We felt that it was better, like the city manager indicated, to focus on our department, our actions, our policies, our procedures. And I will assure you that our procedures, simply because we're a municipal police department, are going to differ a lot from what the sheriff's department does statutorily as well as procedurally, and also what the UWPD's procedures are. So I agree with the city manager that piece of the amendment is probably a slippery slope to go down, even as an advisory group, because I don't know what UW does, I don't know what the SO does, and conversely, they don't know what we do as well. But the only other point that I'd add is 6 months is it's a tight timeline. There's so much going on in our worlds day to day that 6 months with a monthly meeting and to accomplish something may not be a reasonable or feasible outcome for us. So I would just, that last piece was just me, and that's what I have to say.
Thank you, Chief Stalder. And I was going to ask if you had any other points for consideration, so I'm glad that you just added that because I would have given you an opportunity either way. So appreciate that. City Manager, thank you very much also for that summary. The rear view mirror sometimes provides the best picture, and it occurs to me that it would have been good to outline some of that in previous meetings, but that's okay. It's also a product of receiving questions and inquiries and hearing concerns from people as well. So we do appreciate that. And that document can be made available or is publicly available now somewhere? Okay.
Yes, Mayor. The clerk put it on the website today with the other agenda materials.
Very good. I didn't see it in there, but I miss things sometimes. Do we have questions now, council members? And I think we should open this up for questions to Councilmember Somerville for some of her thought process behind the proposed amendment, the city manager regarding anything that she's outlined for us, and anything that you may want to ask Chief Stalder regarding the input that he shared with us. Let's open it up. We'll go to Councilmember Gabriel, then we'll go to Councilmember Harrington. I'll just do my best to keep track. If I miss you, leave your hand up for a minute. Just give me a chance to see you. So go ahead, Councilmember Gabriel, please, you're up.
Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate Councilor Somerville's thoughtful presentation and her changes. I think one of the main points I would like to make is the professional facilitator is paramount. And I think that's, in my opinion, really a good addition. Just listening to the chief talking about the 6 months might be a problem. I tend to agree with that. So, I think all of these changes that Councilor Somerville brought up make a lot of sense. I support them, with maybe the exception of the 12 or the 6 months from 12 to back to 6. So we can discuss that a little bit further, but thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, Councilmember Gabriel. Appreciate your thoughts on it. Councilmember Harrington, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To both the chief and Councilor Gabriel's point, I support the shorter term. I think just practically of closing this conversation for the community sooner. But I hear what both of them are saying in a need for extending this. So I'm curious if the group feels like they are unable to accomplish the task, if they could request an additional month or an additional 2 months from the council at that point. I don't know if that's amenable to Councilor Somerville or not, or if that's satisfactory to Councilor Gabriel or to really the chief's point.
Thanks, Councilmember Harrington. I think there's a direction that we're moving in. Councilmember Somerville, I know what you're thinking, what you have in mind, I believe. Why don't we go ahead and go around a little bit, make sure there's no other input on other items, and then we'll get into maybe some changes to your proposal. Council members, Councilmember Cumby.
I can see the desire for the group to finish its work within 6 months, and that we would have recommendations and be able to move the work forward. But as I look at a group process and that a meeting one time a month times 6 months, I do not believe that the group can achieve the cohesion necessary to really do the depth of work that they have the potential to do. And I would recommend that we extend that time beyond 6 months. I just think it would be a much more in-depth and thoughtful outcome. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Cumby. Council members, other input on the information that we've heard, either about Councilmember Somerville's substitute resolution or anything you've heard from the city manager or the chief? Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To kind of the 2 points that have come up on the timeline. So the resolution says that they have to meet at least monthly. I would recommend, for I think some of the reasons that Councilor Cumby discussed, that they meet probably every 2 weeks. One of the concerns I had about the longer time frame is when you carry an issue like this and you're only meeting monthly, you lose pieces in between those meetings. You lose cohesion in between those meetings. And so I was concerned about the group size, first of all, and trying to make it productive. But I think, we could certainly amend that to say they have to meet every, twice monthly or something along those lines, if that would help. But that certainly was my intention on that. Is I don't think a once a month meeting would suffice to meet that deadline. I think the chief is absolutely correct. And then on the deadline for December, given the difficult conversations that have gone on in the community, I agree with Councilor Harrington in trying to, move this conversation along and really look at what we need to do or to not to do. And I think the December 1 reporting, it says that they have to report by December 1, but I fully anticipated if they needed more time to investigate more things or they weren't done with their conversations, then they would say in that report, yes, please extend the ad hoc group for 6 months or 9 months or whatever that is. And I think that's an important part for the council, because we're giving this working group some space to go through these things, but we can't let them, I don't think it's a good idea to let them go on for a year without coming back to us and telling us what's going on. I think that we need that check-in point, and I think that December 1 provides that check-in point, and that was kind of my thought process behind that. But if they needed more time, I'd certainly give them more time, and again, encourage them to meet more often. Regarding the inclusion of the sheriff and the UWPD chief, I went back and forth on this several times. I really struggle with the idea that while I appreciate the intention is to really focus in on the LPD, the reality of the situation is that we've got multiple law enforcement agencies all working in the same jurisdiction. And it's certainly not my intention of the committee, and that's why I didn't put them on as voting members, to bring in and review sheriff's office practices or UWPD practices. But I thought it could be beneficial for them to just be sitting in the room and listening to the conversations that we're engaged in with the LPD. And maybe they didn't need to be on as liaisons. Maybe that's just an invitation from the committee. But I think at some point in time, and I know they all work together really well right now, but given the crossovers from the conversations, as the chief described, I don't know how we get away from, not talking, not sharing what we're going through with the other law enforcement agencies. I'm certainly amenable if the chief, he sounds like he feels strongly to taking them off as liaisons. But again, I think we're going to get stuck in that point where we're not talking to the other law enforcement agencies, maybe in the way that we need to. So that's why I included them. But I guess that's not a point I'm, want to die on, apparently. If we need to take it out, we can take it out. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, Council Member Somerville, thank you very much. Chief Stoller, I see that you'd like to weigh in here, so please go ahead.
Yeah, Mayor and Council, Councilor Somerville, I just want to point out that limiting law enforcement involvement or excluding law enforcement involvement has to include the Wyoming Highway Patrol, the Department of Criminal Investigation, and Wyoming Game and Fish, because on a daily basis we work with all those departments, probably sometimes to a greater extent than we do with the SO or the UWPD. So I only throw that out there because we're not the only 3 people in town. There's multiple people in town, including federal agencies that come in and out of our jurisdiction on a regular basis. I just wanted to make that clarification.
Thank you, Chief Stoller. I'm going to go to Councilmember O'Doherty and then to Councilmember Cumby. Councilmember O'Doherty.
So given that, and because the third liaison representation says other liaisons may be established at any time as necessary by majority consensus of the working group, the working group may want to invite in different entities at different points, but we're not saying to the sheriff's office and to the UW police office, please, like, always give us somebody for all of these meetings we're going to have. So I would like to strike the addition of the Albany County Sheriff and the University of Wyoming Police Chief from the resolution. Thank you.
Would you
I'll
like to
second that?
So that's my amendment. I moved to strike them.
All right. All right. And I think Councilmember Harrington.
Yeah, I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
Second. Yes, Councilmember Somerville.
For kind of procedural cleanliness, before we get too far into amending the amendment to amend the amendment, I would be happy to take that as a friendly amendment and just strike that from my amendment so we don't have to go through and vote on that. So I would remove the Albany County Sheriff and the University of Wyoming Police Chief from my substitute resolution.
The second on that original motion will need to concur.
That was Vice Mayor, I believe.
Vice Mayor Pearson, I believe she's indicated that that's fine with her. City Clerk.
Mr. Mayor, since we did have a second on the motion to strike, if they could withdraw that motion to enact.
I withdraw my amendment.
Thank you, City Clerk. Thank you, Councilmember Doherty. The second concur with that. Councilmember Harrington.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I concur.
I think everybody has to agree. All right. And I think that's the best way to go. We want to try to keep this process as straightforward as possible before we get mired into things. Councilmember Cumby, thank you for waiting.
Mayor, through you, Councilor Somerville, your solution satisfied, I think, my concerns. And I believe that a bi-weekly meetings would allow the group enough group process time that they could adequately develop their ability to work together. And then I like the idea, I think it's very positive, the idea of reporting December 1, 6 months into the process, And at that time, the committee could determine if they felt that they needed additional time or if they felt that their charge had been satisfied at that time. So thank you very much. I'm satisfied with that solution.
Thank you, Councilmember Cumby. Other questions for City Manager, Chief Stelter, Councilor Somerville? Councilor Somerville, I have a question. I see the chief. I'm going to let him go ahead. Go ahead, Chief Stelter.
Mayor and Council, I just want to add in, and this is a conversation I've had with the city manager, you know, over the course of the last many months that we've gone through this process. And while I can appreciate, sorry about that, that's my email. While I can appreciate everybody's concern to move this forward in a quick manner, I have a police department to run, and my expectation and my thought process is that this group is going to want statistics. This group is going to want research. This group is going to want facts, and I have a load already on my shoulders running a police department. The city manager certainly has a much larger load on her shoulders running an entire organization. I felt all along that monthly meetings were doable. I question from a staff perspective whether bi-monthly meetings over the course of 6 months are something that me and my analysts can keep up with. And I just want to throw that out there because I appreciate the expedience that this wants to be done by, and really from the community's standpoint that it needs to be done quicker. I'm just not sure that I can keep up with that demand, and I appreciate being able to make that comment.
Absolutely, Chief Stelter. It's a point well taken. Members of the council, there are other activities for the city of Laramie, the city council, our management staff, and the chief of police to work on while we address this issue. City manager.
Mayor and council, I would just note that, you know, I share some of this chief's concern. I'm in my head weighing it out because you are suggesting a facilitator, and facilitators can show up. And frankly, I want to tell you, I think that's a good suggestion. This is a very difficult issue for the community, and I think a facilitator could go a long way to making this a value-added exercise versus a more divisive one. So I appreciate your forethought in bringing that forward. But facilitator can show up and just facilitate a meeting, or a facilitator can also be responsible for that function as well as some of the administrative burden. So I guess what I would offer to you all as food for thought is, if you're really committed to expediting the timeline, we maybe could bring on some temporary assistance to help. Now, that won't solve, for instance, all of the chief's issues, because really the police department folks are the ones who are going to have to pull statistics if we need statistics. But if we could have your authorization to hire some administrative support to pull agendas together and collate materials and plan the logistics of meetings, that might go some way to helping ease the burden on staff. So just thoughts off the top of my head.
Thank you, City Manager. Councilmember Harrington, and then I'll go to you, Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't have an awful lot of experience in working with groups with facilitation, but recently I have worked through a process with a facilitator as a member of the council on the Tourism Coalition. That facilitator did do a considerable amount of the administrative work. They did have assistance, and in this case it was because it was tourism related, a UW student who was in that major, or an applicable major. So I certainly think my feeling would be, City Manager, if you deem that necessary as you're working through the process of selecting a facilitator for this group. You know, I'm open to certainly to making sure that we have given you the resources to make this possible. You and the chief both. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Somerville, do you want to speak, or do you want me to go to Councilmember Cumby and we'll go around with comments before we start looking at other changes that we might want to make within your motion?
I'd be happy to let Councilor Cumby go first, and then I'll follow up on that.
Yeah, I think that's the way to go with this. Councilmember Cumby.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to also say I think a facilitator could be extremely helpful. It allows all other members of the group to relax into their role, and for that person then to engage in and facilitate the group process, to make notation about the group content, and then to write that up and disseminate that, and to take care of that type of business of the group process. And it really makes a huge difference in how well, in the facility of a group. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Cumby. Appreciate it. Vice Mayor Pierce.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I guess in hearing what the police chief is suggesting in terms of the timeline, I think based on how the resolution is written, I don't necessarily think we need to change anything. And what I mean by that is, if we look at the purpose and we see the change of 12 to 6, all we're saying there is at 6 months, we're just going to get an update. At 6 months, just an update. We're not ending the working group. We're not putting a timeline on the working group. We're just basically saying we're going to get an update within 6 months. So I think we're okay with that. I think that, allows the working group to continue, or, just give us a little report. The other mention of the timeline issue is not until the very bottom of the resolution, unless I've missed something, is not until the very bottom of the resolution where it says meetings, working group will meet not less than monthly for 6 months instead of 12. And I think if we just go, working group will meet not less than monthly, and just put a period there and forget 6 or 12, the committee, the working group would then organically, holistically complete their work when they complete their work. So I mean, I think they're going to hear from, they'll get it done when they get it done. So maybe that would be an approach to take, and that way it solves a couple of the problems. I'm trying to kind of find a happy ground here. So I'd be willing to take questions on that, but I think if we just place a period after monthly, I think we're fine, if that makes sense to folks, to council members. Unless I missed another notation of timeline, I think we might be good.
Vice Mayor, I think we'll just keep going around here and making sure everybody's had a chance, and then we can revisit that specific recommendation and see what we want to do. Councilmember Harrington, did you want to speak to the Vice Mayor's point, or do you want to? Okay. Anybody else before we focus on that specific item? Councilmember Somerville. All right. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So Vice Mayor, when I read the meeting section, I read that as they may not meet for less than 6 months is the way I interpret that. I may be wrong, but I think your point is the same. I think the result is the same. That it's not a cap on the length. On the long end, it's just a cap on the short end. It's a floor rather than a ceiling, I suppose. And then it does say, I mean, just in reading that first section, it does say they will bring recommendations in 6 months. I think what we just need to make clear is that if they have not reached their final recommendations, council is open if we're asked for more time. I think that would be the important piece. That may not need to be in this ordinance or this resolution, but it would be important for those members who are on the committee to know. Ad hoc working group, I should say. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Harrington. Anybody else for the Vice Mayor's suggestion here? Councilmember Somerville, I'm going to go to you, but I want to speak to this quickly as well before we give a chance for you to recap it. I'm a little concerned about this proposal being too open-ended. I think we want a work product, and I think we want it delivered at some point, regardless of whether or not the ad hoc committee can request more time to continue working on that. I would hate to see the ad hoc committee set up to be able to continue in perpetuity. I think some deadlines for some work product would be good. And if they need more time, that's fine. But I still think that time should be outlined and there should be some constraints on it so that it's not an issue where this can go for 2 years or 18 months or some time period there. I think keeping some timeline in place with deliverables in a framework for the council is probably the best way to go. I think there's plenty of room in between, but in a general way, I would be much more comfortable with an approach where some timelines were outlined with a degree of flexibility and the option for the ad hoc committee to say, we need another month, we need another 2 months, or there's an issue that we need more information about, and we need to make sure that the chief has time to aggregate the data for us and that the facilitator has time to do what they need to do. But the reason I'm concerned about something that could be perpetual is that one, we need to pay a facilitator. Two, the city manager has suggested that other expenditures might be appropriate to make this work efficiently and to not chip into too much staff time. So that's a budget issue and could continue to stack costs on top of it. So I'd like to see something a little more tightened up than open-ended. That's just my perspective as an individual member of the council. Councilmember Somerville, you had a hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just wanted to touch on a few points. So I certainly agree with the city manager on the facilitator. It was my intention to, provide some professional level support to this group. And I guess the question for the city manager would be, as it's written here, do you feel if this were to pass, you could come back to us, at a meeting here in the near future with, a budget, if we need to do a budget amendment for additional administrative support, or would you like some clarity added? Do I need to add some more language to this resolution to give that flexibility to you and the chief?
City manager.
Mayor, through you, Councilor Somerville. No, I think that I hear what you're saying. I think the language as stated is sufficient, and that's exactly what I would have suggested. Councilor Somerville, is I'll put my head together with the chief and we can try to identify what a facilitator costs, especially one that will do and bear some of the administrative work and bear that burden with us, and try to bring you a budget amendment for consideration. Maybe a couple, light administration or heavy administration, something like that. So yeah, we will talk about that, Dale and I.
Thank you, City Manager. And then Mr. Mayor, I wanted to touch on the point again. If we leave the resolution as written, we are putting, that we do want some recommendations by December 1st, 2021. But one of those recommendations can absolutely be, we need 2 or 3 more months to do X, Y, and Z. That's certainly my intention. And I hear the chief loud and clear. But I also agree, and I want to balance that with the need to kind of move on this issue, move it forward, and close that out. And I'm certainly, as an individual council member, willing to provide that support through facilitation and administration support to enable them to do that.
Councilmember Somerville, what is your plan for the pay for this item? What budget areas are you suggesting that the council take a look at along with the city manager?
That's a great question, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. So my primary would be to look at our city council line item in the budget. We have usually a pretty decent line item in there for travel expenditures that we have not used, I believe, either in 2020 and probably will not use in 2021. I think that just getting some very, very rough estimates for the type of facilitation that was described by Councilor Harrington, we would be under the $10,000 mark. But that's just based on my independent research. I would certainly defer to the city manager on what type of facilitation they need, but that's where I would look.
Councilmember Somerville, I had heard that part of the discussion earlier, that's what we'd identified. I was just curious if there's a sense that that's a sufficient amount and that is available, because I anticipate that won't be the only thing that we seek to use those dollars for some council processes. So council members, I apologize, but this is an issue of concern for me. So I'd like to see if the city manager might share with us a little bit about that budget issue. City manager, do you agree with Councilor Somerville's assessment that there's going to be enough funding available there for that project without bringing us close to an area where we're maxing that out?
So thank you, Mayor. I think maybe Nancy's looking up your budget, the city clerk. Yeah, I thought that's what I saw you doing. As I recall, I think you have at least 30,000 in that line item. Nancy can clarify. But yeah, I think that there's probably sufficient funding there. 40,000. Okay. Yeah. And you rarely expend that full 40,000 even in a travel year. And with COVID, obviously you're not traveling. So I can't imagine a facilitator for 6 months would cost more than that. To be honest, though, I've not costed any facilitation services in a long time. What I recall from looking at mediation services a number of years ago is oftentimes those folks charged similar rates to legal services. But I can do some more investigation there and see what we can come up with as far as pricing options.
Thank you, City Manager. Council members, I don't know about the rest of you, but depending on the amount of that, the intensity of my heartburn as a member of the council could go up or down in terms of what we wanted to expend on facilitation. And I appreciate everyone's patience with that little sidebar, because I think it was an important point and maybe an important point. I'm not sure where we're at in this discussion, except that we're kind of biting around the edges of the timeline issue. And so I wonder if we might go back to the vice mayor to sort of recap and address and see if her concerns have been addressed and if the vice mayor is comfortable with where this is at. And then I think we need to move forward to some other additional parts of the discussion. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, I think I'm fine with it. I guess I just was attempting to give our police chief a nod in terms of his busy work schedule. And I think that certainly that can be facilitated by what I suggested on the very last bit of this resolution regarding the meetings. And if council doesn't want to do that, that's fine. But I think we need to be cognizant of his very full plate. So that was my suggestion.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. And I want to clarify that I'm not advocating for the 6-month timeline necessarily, or the 8-month timeline. I think if we need to change that some and provide that opportunity for the ad hoc committee if they want to report back and extend that all seems fine to me. But having it be entirely open-ended is a concern for me, because I think that it would be better if there was a schedule for deliverables, if you will, from the committee for us to look at some point that everyone acknowledged going into the process. Chief Stalder, I see that you raised your hand.
Yeah, Mayor and Councilor Pierce, I don't want to weigh in on the timeline or my work schedule. I just want to point out that what I anticipate is what has occurred over the course of the last, almost year now, is that people want a lot of statistics, a lot of information, a lot of policy input. Those can't come from a facilitator. That has to come out of my office. And I have limited staff, and add on to that fact that I have a new CAD RMS system that may have I guess, challenges producing some of the stats. As I indicated when we did the annual report last fall, I don't have good stats right now because of our new CAD RMS. And I just feel with what people are going to want, whether it's on the mental health side, the cause for services side, on the traffic stop side, demographics, everything else, that I'm going to be challenged, and nobody else can do that but me, and it's going to be a challenge. And I don't want to get in on your timelines or anything else. I just feel like, trying to anticipate going forward what's occurred over the last year could present some challenges for me. Thank you.
Chief, I'd like you to hang on just a second, because what I think the council needs to know is, can you give us a range that you think is realistic? I understand your reluctance to weigh in on the timeline, and you don't have to be specific at 8 months, 16 months, but a general range might be good for us to understand, so that we can put that into what we want to consider. A range, if you will, that's realistic, not necessarily specific.
Mayor and Council, excuse me, Mayor and Council, I felt from the beginning and in conversations with the city manager and the assistant chief, the 12-month timeline was something that we thought was doable with a once-a-month meeting. You get into twice a month or something else like that, and concerns expressed by people who are not knowledgeable about the profession, about how we do things, wanting to know about case law, all that other stuff. The once a month was reasonable. I would still stand by that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Before I go back to Council Member Somerville one more time, and then to comments on the amendments, anybody else for Chief Stalder, City Manager Jordan, or Councilmember Somerville? Councilmember Cumby.
I understand what Chief Stalder is saying, and with that in mind, I have reservations about whether it can be accomplished in 6 months, meeting once a month, for the group to come together, get to know each other, feel comfortable, and be able to cohesively bring together a recommendation. I think it's going to take a year. I'd love to see it happen in 6 months. I would love that. But I think that circumstances may not support that. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Cumby. Councilmember Somerville, a lot of feedback here and some new information to chew on. I'd ask you to respond to that and see where you're at now with your proposal before we move to public comment on the amendment, which is a substitute resolution.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do hear what the chief is saying, and I want to make sure we're providing all of the support that we can. I really am struggling with the concerns about dragging this out over another year, though I think this has been really discussed quite a bit. I certainly understand the statistics issue, and from all the data that was presented, I was certainly under the impression that we had most of that already. I'm happy to stand to be corrected on that. So I guess if we wanted to, to move it a little bit and split it in half and maybe put a January or a February date on it, it still puts some sideboards on it and gives them a little bit more time. So I guess I don't know. I'd love to hear what the rest of the council thinks. I certainly think that 12 months is too long to drag this out again over another entire year. The community, I think it's a discussion that's been going on already for a year, and it's divisive in the community, and we need to deal with it and kind of move it along its way.
Thank you, Councilmember Somerville. One point of information that I think needs to be addressed is I think there is a great deal of information that's been compiled and is available already. I think what I heard the chief address as a concern is requested information that we can't anticipate because we don't have the ability to predict what the ad hoc committee may want to see outside of what we've already looked at in kind of a general way. So I think that's part of what I heard, I think, in this discussion, Councilmember Somerville, for what it's worth. Council members, I'd like to go to the public on these proposed changes, but I did hear Councilmember Somerville ask to try to get your views because I believe she's trying to decide whether she wants to modify this before someone else makes a motion to modify it for her. So why don't we check and see, or we'll go to the public and then we can get back to working on the amendment. I see Councilor Schuster's eager to get to the public. Anyone else want to ask any further questions before public comment? All right. Members of the public, welcome. Thank you for giving another evening of your time to the City Council on this issue. I would like to ask that you direct comments and suggestions towards the merits of the substitute resolution, whether it's an improvement or whether it is simply unacceptable because the general process is acceptable, but just focusing comments on that is probably the most useful information right now. So just a polite and respectful request on our part to try to focus the comments and discussions in that direction. I see a lot of hands that have come up. I'm just going to call them in order. The first speaker in order is Linda Devine. So let's admit her, and I will give her the floor. Welcome. Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would support Councilmember Somerville's substitution, specifically with the time. I think 6 months is something that we need. I'd remind the City Council that you voted to start looking into this almost a year ago. I can certainly appreciate the City Manager and Chief's concern about the time. I'd also, though, remind City Council that the presentation that was provided just a couple months ago was primarily through the City Manager, through Chief Stalder, and the City Attorney. And the City Manager and Chief Stalder both have stated out front that they didn't necessarily think that we needed a citizen review board. So I think that any time delay has probably been because the majority of the research that was done was completed by folks that weren't really in favor of it in the first place. I would encourage you to adopt Council Members Somerville's proposal today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Devine. Respectful request to members of the public to try not to characterize motivations as outlined in Robert's Rules of Order. Next, Council, we have, I believe, Mr. or Mrs. Reese. We'd like to admit them. I'm not sure. So please identify yourself for the council, and you have the floor.
Hi, Rex Reese. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Over the past week, you've heard very strongly from 1,000 people based on the resolution you provided several weeks ago. We got information. We had time to go through it, form our opinions, and provide it to you. Obviously, it was a very firm no on this whole idea. Now, at the last minute, you offer a multitude of amendments and answers to some questions. All new information. Only the council and the city manager had time to put together these inputs. If you vote tonight to pass this substitute resolution, you've denied the public a chance for our groups to analyze this plan and propose our own amendments. Why don't we get a fair amount of time? You had time to prepare this. It was going on behind the scenes. These documents were not made available till the last minute. And a vote tonight would be a very shady deal. You're supposed to represent the public, not cut us out of the loop and push something through without us having a fair time to analyze it and then think how we want to approach it and provide inputs. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you. I'm going to again remind members of the public to not characterize motivations about proposals in a specific sense. Next up, we have Tom, which I believe is Mr. Mattimore. Tom Mattimore, let's admit him. And you have the floor.
His phone still shows muted. I don't know if we need to do something for that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Am I getting through now? All right. Councilor and Mayor, thank you very much for the time. And I'm sure the 1,000 people who signed petitions concerning this, thank you for your time as well. I will stick strictly to the amendment. I think this amendment is a retrograde movement on this project and does not provide anything but more confusion to the public and more work for city staff and the police department. I feel that this is still leaving the bulk of it in the hands of too much of the University of Wyoming, although I do think the mayor and vice mayor being on the board, if you pass it, is a good idea. That's the only part of this resolution that I think shows any merit whatsoever. That's all I have to say about the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Lindsay Conyers. Let's admit Lindsay Conyers, and when she is in the room, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to again mention the 1,000+ residents that have signed this petition opposing this in its entirety. And while I appreciate the added staff to help facilitate this, the city does not have the money for this. Whether you use it from the travel budget or not, you don't have the money for this. There is budget cuts coming down the pike from the governor that's going to affect everyone. It's going to trickle down into our communities, and it's going to affect everyone. We cannot afford this committee in the way that it is presented here. I completely oppose this on its face in its entirety. No ifs, ands, or buts, no amendments. I don't care. I am against this. And I appreciate your time this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. next we have a screen name, Lenny, and if you could just provide your full name for the city council, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My name is Leonard Martin, and I've been a resident of Laramie, Wyoming for more than 40 years. I'm a third-generation Wyoming native. And I can't imagine who dreamed up this idea. After listening to the conversation about the amendments to this resolution, it's obviously a flawed plan to bring to heel a police department that ranks in the highest level of police departments in the entire nation. And I think it speaks to a total misrepresentation of the citizens of Laramie and the intentions that you express, although maybe honorable, are doubtful when you look at the facts. It's going to cost money. It's going to put burdens on one of the best police chiefs in the country that he cannot afford to bear. And it is going to bring a lot of distrust from the community towards the city council, the city mayor, our city management. It is a bad idea all the way around. We need to look at things that are broken, like maybe the city manager's office for bringing this resolution to the floor in the first place. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your views. Point of information is the city manager brought this forward at the request of the city council. Next up, we have Billy Harris. Let's admit Billy Harris into the room. Mr. Harris, you've got the floor.
Oh, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. While I appreciate Councilor Somerville's amendments and concerns over timeline, I'd like you to reconsider this resolution, and I'd like you to keep in mind exactly what this council passed in Resolution 2020-38. In Section 1, the city manager was to identify and present options to the city council for the creation of a civilian oversight board. Nearly 10 months later, you are recommending the formation of an ad hoc committee with the ultimate goal of community education and no definitive establishment or recommendation of a civilian oversight board. That section of this resolution has not been upheld. So why is this temporary committee needed? The council has already passed the sentiment of the community in desiring an established civilian oversight board. The committee being established should not be ad hoc, and the wraparound process of this ad hoc committee is essentially in opposition to Section 1 of Resolution 2020-38. City and police management have publicly reiterated their sentiment that civilian oversight of LPD is not needed, and their creation and presence on this committee will likely come to the same non-functional end. Police on a committee recommending police oversight measures to your council is a conflict of interest, and police conducting research on functions and forms of COBs and the form of this ad hoc committee is also a conflict of interest. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on our list is, excuse me, Tracy Rosenland. Let's admit Tracy into the room, and you've got the floor.
Thank you, Mayor and members of City Council. I appreciate you holding this meeting and allowing me to speak. My name is Tracy Rosenland. I'm the Director of Civilian Oversight for Albany County for proper policing. I've spoken at previous meetings. I appreciate the work that has been done over the time that has passed since the resolution in June of 2020. We are supportive of moving forward with the WGPCC. As far as the amendments go, we're also supportive of adding the community forums. Additionally, we are supportive of the 12-month timeline as opposed to a shortened one. We also support the mental health member being a licensed professional. The other portion of the amendments we support are the member changes for Civil Service Commission representation and having the vice mayor on as well. And our final request would be that a more neutral party be a part of the exploration for the facilitator with the city manager. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. City Clerk, the next speaker I have is just a phone number. Let's admit the caller. And if you could please introduce yourself for the record, you have the floor. And I think it's *6 caller to unmute. We can hear you.
Hi, I think you're coming back around to me again, and I already spoke. This is Mr. Matamore. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Matamore. I apologize for that. I didn't recognize the number from before. Next speaker is screen name. I believe this is Mr. Fonte. If we can let him into the room, and if you could just identify yourself for the record with your full name. Welcome. You have the floor. You'll need to unmute.
Gotcha there. Thank you for your time. Hello, council and all Laramonians who are watching and listening. You know, I'm going to just say I'm highly disappointed. I thought we were actually going to hear some real hard change, some real gut wrenching change that we need to look in the mirror and see that the very people that we're believing protect us and stand up for those travelers and stand up for protection of property rights and the laws are the very people that are creating the chaos which results when you break down public trust. And, you know, this problem is much bigger than the LPD. Our evidence clearly shows the problem is corrupt authority in the justice system as a whole. Not everyone, but it definitely includes the city manager. The council just gutted the concept when you exclude the sheriff's department and not just address the problem, and you're not addressing the problem in the prosecutor's office. How is the sheriff's office not involved, especially with the lawsuits against their unethical protocol? The council members, you sound like you're talking in some kind of vacuum. Like you don't really understand. We're talking about the reality of the poor people, the needs of those who can't speak for themselves because they're elderly and they can't vision themselves having that capacity. We're speaking for them. Those are our people. These are the people that need you to understand the need of accountability of this authority. This is very important. Plus, and finally, Sheriff Applehans is there because of the need for accountability. So, you know, darn it. I don't know if you guys are going to start over or, you know, I appreciate everybody's comments, even the ones that don't think there is a need. Well, if you want to call me and ask me what the need is, my number is 307-760-4580. And I will be glad to spend any time required with anybody on which side of the belief system of the need for change or not at any given time. You just call me and we'll have a good talk about police reports and about falsifying records, and we'll show you some videos and some recordings, and you know we'll let you see the whole picture for yourself and let the evidence speak for itself, and I don't really have to say much more. So you all have a nice evening, and thank you for your time. And I would like to understand what happened to the city manager. Did she just leave out for the question and answer in here? Is she still involved here this evening?
Just for the record, the city manager is still here with us. And,
okay.
And Mr. Fonte, I'm pretty sure that's you, but for the public record, can you just confirm that?
Oh, yes, sir. My name is Andrew Joel Fonte, and I've been a resident for over 16 years.
Thank you, and thank you for giving up some time out of your evening here. And yes, everyone that was on the call at the beginning, is still on the call, as far as I can tell.
Appreciate your time. Thank you. Have a good night.
Other speakers from members of the public that want to provide their views for this discussion? I have Lori Hill. Let's admit Lori Hill into the webinar, and you have the floor.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, Mayor and City Council and the City Manager, thank you for giving us time for public comment. I want to say I agree with everything that Rex, Lindsay, and Lenny Martin said. We're at over 1,000 signatures now, and if more of us were able to spend more hours gathering signatures rather than working full-time at jobs that don't pay $40,000 for 6 months, we would have more signatures. There's a great silent majority out there that does support our policemen, our deputies, etc. So that's about all I need to say. Thank you very much for allowing public comment.
Thank you, and thank you for providing us with your views and giving up time out of your evening. Other members of the public. Council members. All right, we have a speaker. We have a screen name of Diana. If you could please just provide us with your full name for the record, and then you have the floor.
Okay, my name is Diana Seaback, and I live in Laramie. You asked us to comment on the amendment, and I do appreciate that the amendment makes some good changes to the resolution, but I would still say that I oppose the amendment, oppose the resolution. It was obvious to me in the early last year in May and June when this all came about with the resolution 2020-38 that the valid point that I could hear made in all of the complaining was that the police department statistics are incorrect because people are intimidated to report. And as caller before last noted, he purports to have evidence of all kinds of wrongdoing. And I just believe that a lot of time could have been saved if initially the charge was to form, a group that could suggest some more transparent ways to make complaints that are not intimidating, so that people who believe they have been wronged, or others, or they're speaking for those who have been wronged, they perceive, that there could be a way to collect information that would determine if indeed we have a problem. It's really not at all clear that the police department has significant problems. So it seems to me that figuring that out would be a really good first step, and it wouldn't require a year and a lot of money and a lot of people to examine very interesting aspects of policing, but it really doesn't there's no bearing that it would have on Laramie per se. Let's figure out if there's a problem first and then address the problems.
Thank you, Ms. Seaback.
Okay, I guess that's all. So I guess I would have to say I'm not in favor of the amendment because I'm not in favor of the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you very much for providing us with your views and for spending your time. the city council meeting this evening. Other members of the public. Council members, how many rounds of public comment do you want to entertain this evening? Do you want to do more than one? We're tied so far. Council members, I'm going to need you to weigh in on this topic. How many rounds of public comment do you want to do more than one?
Sure.
Yes, I believe more than one. A lot of council members have spoke more than one, so I think we should allow the same to the public.
Thank you, Council Member Schuster. Council members often speak more than once, I would hope, but I do see other hands up. Council Member Cumby.
I would entertain more than one, but I would just, if people have a new perspective or new thoughts, new ideas, new comments, rather than, anyway, that would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Councilmember Stalder, you'd raised your hand. Let me recognize you now. I apologize for skipping over.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just wondering if Robert's Rules says that we have to have public comment on each amendment. I think it's appropriate and we should have as much public comment as we need.
Councilmember Stalder, I'm not sure how clear Robert's Rules is on this, but in this case, the entire resolution has been amended once by substitution. So that would be one amendment, unless we get into further amendments. City Clerk, did you want to provide us with some guidance regarding the parliamentary procedure aspect? Or let me recognize you for whatever you wanted to tell us.
Mr. Mayor, I was just going to mention, in my recollection, it doesn't speak to public comment. Your rules of procedure would be more of what we would defer to. However, it does leave a lot to the discretion of the mayor. So as far as public comment, typically in a council meeting, the council accepts public comment for each amendment and on the main motion. So that's all that I had for you.
Thank you, City Clerk. And Council, that's why I've gone back to you to get your views about how you want to handle this public comment situation, as opposed to unilaterally making that decision on your behalf. And what I'm hearing and not hearing strong objections to is more public comment. So I'm going to open it back up, but I'm going to go in order. And I think I have a hand up again from several speakers. So we'll go first to Mr. Fonte, and let's admit him. That's Andrew Joel Fonte, and you have the floor.
Thank you kindly for the opportunity again. I support that. We're the public. We should definitely get that opportunity. You know, just to say how much we love our police, our law enforcement. We love the concept of the American light shining on the hill that says due process rules here. That's why we love it so much that we're willing to put ourselves with a target on our back and make it say, you know, if you're going to pick on somebody that can handle it. And now we have evidence of this. And this evidence, if those 1,000 people that signed that petition, if they would see this evidence as clear as sky as blue in this beautiful Wyoming sky, we would all know, like Diana asked, if there was a problem, let's define it. Well, we are defined. The problem is defined. Appelhans wouldn't be here. There wouldn't be this conversation. We wouldn't be aware to this degree. The problem is there's much more awareness and a greater degree to come. And let us look at all the evidence with an open heart and an open mind as a community, and let it speak for itself. And if there's a problem, let us listen. And when we do that, then we can hear who's not telling the truth, and we can hear who's telling the truth. because truth, you can't cover, you can't hide it. So let's support our police, the good guys, the ones that put their life on the lines when we need it. And thank God for them, and thank God for everybody in our community. Every one of you that dedicates your time and your efforts, and the firemen and the nice ladies that work in the courthouse, and all those people that come together are our community, are the backbone of what keeps Laramie ticking. And you know, thank God for all of you. And so with that, I thank you for all the rest of the callers and everybody's comments, and I'll sign off again. Thank you kindly.
Thank you, Mr. Fonte. Next, we have, I believe it's Mr. Reese again. Let's admit him back into the room, and you have the floor.
This is Sandy Reese.
You have the floor. Thank you.
I stand in opposition to both the resolution and any proposed amendments that you are making, because you pulled those on us pretty fast and didn't give us the opportunity to take a look at those and adjust our comments accordingly. Your comments have actually indicated that you have a predetermined outcome to this vote. And I feel that you were doing so with total disregard to public and extensive input. We the people and over 1,000 residents strongly oppose an ad hoc committee or a civilian oversight board in any form. The need simply does not exist. When law enforcement becomes entangled with political entities, the accountability shifts. A politically biased ad hoc committee is one such example, especially one with UW hacks involved in bold and hostile moves against the Laramie taxpayer. What we have here is a solution in search of a problem. It is, I fear, a knee-jerk reaction and a jump on the bandwagon attitude in response to the unrest that has been sweeping the country this past year. Unrest that was carefully crafted using crowd manipulation, spontaneous riot creation, and false police brutality claims. It happened here. For months, people ran rampant through our streets in violation of city code, impeding traffic, beating on vehicles, and intimidating citizens. They stood in front of council, going so far as to unlawfully storm City Hall. They stood in front of you, and they accused LPD of racism, corruption, brutality, and lack of transparency. Yet not one allegation has come with any evidence, and I can tell you why. That's because there has not been a legitimate complaint of racism against LPD in over 40 years. 40. There has also not been an LPD officer-involved shooting in over 8 years. The accusations have gone unchallenged and uncorrected by anyone on council or staff. You, who are the elected oversight board of LPD, have remained silent and unsupportive. Why? Is it because you desire a group of unelected, biased people who are unanswerable to anyone to do your job? Is it perhaps that you fear being called racist? Or is it that you want to see Laramie and LPD moved further to the left and politicized? I do not understand what your motives are in advancing this resolution for an ad hoc committee or civilian oversight board. But what I do understand is that we don't need, want, or can afford an ad hoc committee or a civilian oversight board. And 1,000 Laramie residents agree. Our nationally recognized Laramie PD have honorably upheld their oath to serve and protect, and they don't need oversight. Laramie deserves a great police force. Guess what? We already have one. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for sharing your views and your time, the City Council. Next up, I believe we have Mr. Mattermore wishing to speak again. Let's go ahead and give him the floor. Go ahead, whenever you're ready, sir.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Mr. Mayor, council members, thank you for letting me speak again. Some of my points have been made already, but the particular one is charges of an egregious nature against LPD, unsupported by any facts. I'll give you a few facts about Laramie and being a policeman in Laramie. Every action of any officer on LPD is subject to constant scrutiny. They use body cameras. Their location on duty is monitored. Every time they run a serial number on a bike or a license plate or an ID, it is recorded. Every report they write can be examined by superiors, lawyers, judges, and the state Supreme Court. Any false or exaggerated statement can cost an officer his job or even his freedom. We have sufficient numbers of policemen on this force who are extremely well trained and who consider their jobs a profession, just as much as a doctor, a lawyer, an architect, or an engineer. An architect's work is reviewed by the AIA. A doctor's work is reviewed by the college or the board of surgeons or whatever practice he chooses. Lawyers have their work examined by the Bar Association. To deny having a sufficient police presence on this ad hoc committee, and I'm not going to argue whether it should be on a review board, but not having a sufficient police presence from the rank and file of the police department on this board or this committee is a disservice to these people. If you want a professional police department, then the men and women of that department need to be treated like professionals. This is not a 1970s TV show where cops run around in fast cars and smack people around. They haven't got the time. They haven't got the ability to do that. They are under this. This is 21st century policing, and I compliment Chief Stalder, his command structure, and the officers of LPD for having no complaints. You paid $60,000 in 2015 to commission a study on what the Laramie Police Department was like. In case you haven't read it, you need to dig it out and reread it, because in 2015, this was one of the most advanced, technologically proficient, and best police departments in the nation, according to the consultants you hired to evaluate them. Since that date, we've lost 5 officers. I don't see how we can sit here and tolerate these charges of particularly corruption. The most egregious charge of all that's unsubstantiated is corruption. Chief Stalder doesn't let his men and women get a donut on the cuff. They won't take a cup of coffee. They're not allowed to. So I think these charges, constant harangue of charges of racism, homophobia, corruption, enough's enough. Put up or shut up. And I don't think we need this this ad hoc committee to prove that that just does not happen in this town. Again, I want to thank you for your time, Mr. Mayor and councilors, and your patience with my long-windedness, and 1,000 people who signed petitions against this. Also, thank you for your time. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Manamore. All right. Moving through the list. We have Lindsay Conyers. Let's let her back into the room. Ms. Conyers, you've got the floor.
Unmute. There it is. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to back up everything that Tom said just now and add to that passing this committee will not solve any of these imagined problems, but you can rest assured that it will certainly create them and then some. With the current small budget that is looking at more steep cuts, a review board like this will leave the city an unrecoverable wound. The sad part of it all is that the ones that are going to be left to pick up the pieces after this fleeting idea fails are the longtime residents of Laramie and its police department. And a weak civilian review board is worse than no civilian review board because it gives the illusion of independent accountability, but actually provides little to none. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Piper, Rob Piper. Let's let Mr. Piper in the room. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, council people, for the opportunity to address the board. I was really encouraged by some of the language around this amendment with regard to education, because it feels to me that this whole issue is one of a lack of information. We've heard repeatedly that folks feel that there's no recourse against their police department. The Division of Criminal Investigation investigates local police departments. The State Attorney General's office takes that role as well. There's an opportunity to address these things through the Federal Department of Justice. And proponents of this measure weren't able to provide a single actual instance of misconduct or malfeasance. I myself am very close to retiring career peace officer from a different jurisdiction. I have been so thrilled to live in Laramie. All of the services in this community are stellar. Chief among these is our police department. I feel like this has become a politicized issue, and I speak in opposition to this ad hoc committee in this form. I feel that more effective communication from our leadership about actual problems and actual alternatives would be extremely helpful. I'm very concerned with the anti-police sentiment that some of the activists that support this measure continuously express. The reason that I would support police officers on this board is, as other speakers have pointed out, medical review boards consist of medical doctors because they're subject matter experts. The same is true for peace officers. This is actually a profession, and subject matter expertise is essential to proper understanding. I would hope that this council will take the opportunity to put this on pause, carefully reconsider, and at this time, not take action on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Martin, Leonard Martin. Let's admit him into the room, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thank you for earlier pointing out that the city council directed the city manager's office to go down this road. It was an error on my part to imply otherwise, and I think it speaks highly to the disconnection between city council and the city residents in Laramie. If you give us another 12 months, and this is kind of just a blanket statement, I'll bet we'll have 20,000 signatures on that petition, not 1,000. I understand why one of your members would like to cut the time limit short for the ad hoc committee, because it would give us less time to organize against this ludicrous plan to micromanage a department that is nationally ranked for quality and professionalism. Go away from this path and spend the taxpayers' money on something that will really make a difference. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Council members, we have a member of the public that would like to speak for a third time. I'm going to need to see if we want to continue that, or if we believe we've heard enough from people that want to speak. I'm going to apply that across the board to whoever raises their hand based on your decision going forward. Do we want to allow people a third opportunity to speak, or do we believe that 2 is enough? All right, I'm going to make that call and allow it based on what I've seen so far from the council. Mr. Fonte, welcome. Needed to check. Go ahead. You have the floor.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, council. Thank you, mayor. Thank you, public. Thank you, all you Americans out there with all your wonderful opinions. God bless you, and I hope that your lives are blessed too. But the point is you know, the gentleman that said put up or shut up, I have absolutely no qualm with accepting that challenge. Number one, we thought that's what we were doing here originally before all the talk today, is that we thought we were coming together to join in the concept of a venue to be able to show evidence. Now, let's talk about that word evidence. If we're talking evidence as defined as police reports, police cams, sheriff cams, sheriff reports, court recordings, and years of note taking, then please take me up on the offer. I will answer right now. I'm sitting by. I'll be there tomorrow morning after pottery class. Please call me, 760-4580. Please come over. I will show you the documentation. You can see it and hold it in your hand. I understand there's bravery in these men. I understand they're doing things amazing every day. That is not a question. There is not that question on the table tonight. The question tonight is, what about these people who are taking the law and not using it across the board, enforcing it across the board, no matter if you're poor, no matter versus what's happening is you got an officer who goes up and talks to the Coloradoan who's making a claim that this poor person over here is doing a certain illegal activity. Well, they don't sit there and ticket both parties. They choose right then and there to be the judge of who made the crime and who's going to be cited. They don't cite the rich person because they know they're not going to get away with this. They can sit there and pay somebody to defend them. However, the wonderful ladies down at the office here around the corner, they are overloaded with false tickets that have absolutely no grounds to even be enforced. And it's just put into the system and left to be weeded out. It creates chaos in these poor people's lives, in our lives. And this chaos can only be stopped by bringing it to you guys. So please, let us bring the evidence. That is the point. We need to have a venue to bring you the evidence. Let us do that. That's what we thought we were talking about here. Then the manager gets on, hacking it to hell and back, and now we're back to square one. What the heck are we supposed to do if this is what you guys are doing with it? So bring us a venue, we'll show up, we'll put up all of our evidence, you can critique it, you can ask as many questions as you like. I am an open book with my heart on my sleeve. God bless you people. Thank you for your time. Thank you for all your energies. Thank you for your dreams in Wyoming, Laramie, Wyoming here. That's our community right there, is living your dreams. God bless you all.
Thank you, Mr. Fonte. Last call for public comments. Last call for public comments. Shane Sims. Let's let Shane Sims into the meeting room, and you have the floor. Please.
Good evening, Mayor, Council. Thank you for taking my comment. I would just like to briefly say, with regard to the amendments, that listening sessions in a different format than the meetings that we're having right now, with a facilitator that was actually trained to do this, sounds like it call me an optimist, but it seems like a helpful thing that could happen in this community, because I respect the council's work to try and do this, but clearly, as everyone's mentioned, the passions run high. It might take someone more experienced in that. So that's all I'll add, is that part of the amendment I find very well considered. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sims. Final call for public comments. Seeing none. Closing public comments. Council members. Councilmember O'Doherty.
I'd just like to make a point. The petition that has my name on it, so I paid attention. I would have paid attention if it hadn't, but it says, we support and appreciate the Laramie Police Department, the men and women who show up every day to serve and protect our community. I think everybody here in our meeting feels that way, all of our counselors. And then it says, we feel they are cooperative, efficient, transparent, and we do not believe there's a need for additional oversight of the Laramie Police Department. It doesn't talk about the ad hoc committee. The online petition says they're opposed to additional oversight committee and an ad hoc committee, but I see there's some of the same names on there. So, you know, this petition is talking about an oversight board. We're saying we want an ad hoc committee to listen, and I'm hearing these 1,000 people, and that's great. But to say 1,000 people have spoken, and now nobody else's opinion matters, that doesn't sit with me. So that's why I'm in favor of the resolution. I'm in favor of the changes to the resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Doherty. Council members. Councilmember Cumby.
I agree with, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Councilor O'Doherty that the petition is somewhat confusing, the online version, and it seems that the opposition that I'm hearing the most about is toward an oversight committee or board. And what I would like to see is people come to the table. The members of the police department, members, professional members of our community, and community members come to the table and just discuss what they see, what they think the issues are. I think the police themselves have a lot to offer in our understanding of what's going on. I'd like to hear their opinion. I think that mental health is a major issue that we just do not have the resources to handle, and we need to look at that. And that resources have been decreased for mental health progressively over the past decades. And that responsibility has been relegated to the police and the school system. And I think we can do better than this. And I think that it burdens the police. I think we need to look at solutions that are generated by our community. And so much of the comment tonight, it just is so oppositional one side to another. And that tells me we're not communicating. And I think that this ad hoc community would provide us a tremendous opportunity to communicate so that we're not standing in our silos against one another, and that we're working together as a community to respect professional individuals trying to do their best to care for our community. And I am in favor of the committee because I think we're not communicating, and I think this is a way that we could communicate. Thank you very much for the time to speak.
Thank you, Councilmember Cumby. Sensing that we're nearing the end of the discussion, council members. Councilmember Gabriel.
Thank you, Mayor. I've heard a lot of discussion. All of us have received a number of emails over the past couple of months. I think this is probably a pretty good idea, but as a council representative, I'm going to vote against it. I think I've heard enough from the public that they have to have some kind of voice. I feel really compelled as a council person to stand up and say, yes, I've heard response from the public, I think it's overwhelmingly against this. It's going to take a lot of time. It's going to take financial commitment from the city. I think we have a tremendous police department. And, you know, I'm really on both sides of this, but I feel as a representative, the people have spoken to me, and I'm going to vote against this resolution as it stands. I think it's in the best interest of the city council to listen to the public. And as a Ward 3 councilor, I'm going to vote against. Thank you.
Council members. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm sensing that maybe it's time to vote on the amendment, and I just wanted to wrap everything up by saying, when I crafted this, I really tried to listen to the public comment that we had and the comment by council members, to try to put together something that was workable. I do think that this committee will give us, as is kind of in the amendment, the ability to have some conversations. I'm very interested to hear from our police department what other tools that they would like in their toolbox that they don't have yet, for funding resources or whatever that is. I'm certainly very interested in that. So I appreciate the conversation, and would ask the council to vote yes on the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilmember Somerville. And a point of information, just to make sure everybody's clear, and then I'll go to Councilmember Stelter. If you vote yes on this, that is an affirmative vote on the motion, because this will become the resolution and we will have passed it. That's the motion that's on the floor. So Councilmember Schuster seems to disagree. Point of order, let's refer to rules and procedures to verify that.
There's an amendment on the floor. We're not voting on the resolution yet.
Are we voting on an amendment to the amendment? I don't believe we are. The city clerk.
The motion on the floor, Mr. Mayor, as I understand it right now, is Councilor Somerville's motion to substitute resolution.
Okay, substitute by amendment, but I still consider it amendment.
Yeah.
Right, by substitution, which would eliminate the previous resolution, which would make this a one-vote deal, which is why I thought we better clarify that before we move too much further towards the vote. So, again, if we vote, Councilmember Schuster.
I have a question. Shouldn't we be voting on substitution of this amendment and then vote on the amendment? Isn't there 2 votes to go?
I'll refer to the, well, I'll go to Councilmember Somerville and I'll give the city clerk a minute to make sure. It's important for us to procedurally make sure we know what we're doing here. And then Councilmember Stalder, I have you in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe the proper procedure is described as Councilor Schuster stated, is to vote on the substitution, and then that would become the resolution, but then we'll need to take a vote to pass the resolution, because right now we're just voting on the substitution is how I understand it and how we've done it in the past.
The chair's in doubt about that, but I think the city clerk's going to set us straight, and I'm going to move to Councilmember Stalder so that she can make her comments.
I would love to hear from the clerk. I have an amendment, but I'm not sure if I should make it now or after this vote.
That's reasonable. City clerk, do you need a minute? We can recess.
Yes, please.
We're gonna recess for 5 minutes. City clerk, would that be adequate?
Yeah, that should be good. Thank you.
Recess for 5 minutes to determine. We got a couple of minutes still, but. At 8:23, after the 5-minute recess, council members, I think that was worth doing. Our city clerk, who serves as our parliamentarian, confirms that Councilmember Schuster and Councilmember Somerville are correct. I am not shocked. Councilmember Schuster did not join the council yesterday, and Councilmember Somerville is not chopped liver when it comes to parliamentary procedure. However, we did need to dig into Robert's Rules of Order, and I wasn't going to feel comfortable going one way or the other until we knew for sure. We've got that determined, and there's nothing like an important city council meeting without a parliamentary inquiry. At least not for my money. All right. Let's go back to Councilmember Stalder. Since we have some answers, do you have a direction you want to go? Would you like to withhold your amendment? All right, Councilmember Stalder. Council members, discussion on the amendment. I'm not seeing any. All right. City Clerk, let's please go to the roll call vote on Councilor Somerville's amendment.
Humby.
Yes.
Gabriel.
No.
Harrington.
No.
Yes.
O'Doherty.
Yes.
Schuster.
No.
Stalder.
No.
Somerville.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 6 yeses and 3 noes, Your Honor.
The amendment carries. We are now speaking to the main motion, the resolution as amended. Further discussion, council members. Councilmember Stalder.
Thank you, Mayor. I agree with Councilor Gabriel's comments. However, I want to offer an amendment to this resolution, and I wrote my comments down so I don't ramble too much. To begin with, I know there are those on this meeting who do not think that I should contribute to this discussion because my father is the chief of police. However, a conflict of interest comes about when a councilor or their immediate family stands to gain or lose financially from the actions of council. I don't believe the formation of an ad hoc committee fits this definition. That being said, I think a quote from Councilor Harrington's Facebook page regarding mental health and welfare checks from August of last year sums up my thoughts, and that way it's not coming from me. The quote was, "It's time to start talking with the police and not at them." I want to talk about the lack of police officers on the ad hoc committee. And I'm not talking about officers on an oversight committee. I'm talking about the ad hoc committee that is before us tonight. In the meeting last summer, I actually brought up the idea of an ad hoc committee as a way for police officers to participate in the conversation regarding policing. It was my hope that our community would have an opportunity to meet with and see police as human beings rather than the job that they perform. Our representative, Carly Provenza, stated in a public comment, "That is police policing the police, and that's wrong." However, this is an ad hoc committee, not anyone policing anyone. We've heard extensively from people who support and oppose citizen oversight, but the one group of people we have not heard from are officers, whose behavior we're trying to change or have oversight over. During the 5th Tuesday meeting last week during public comments, Mr. Harris and Ms. Pittman mentioned that the police hold power and this can be intimidating. And I can understand this on an oversight committee. But tonight we're voting, tonight we are voting on an ad hoc committee to discuss policing, not an oversight committee with any power. More than power, I believe that police have a great responsibility to all of us. They have a responsibility to make sure that there are not drunk drivers on the road, that if your house gets broken into, or your business gets robbed, or you or your loved one is raped, or if your child is lost, the police department has a responsibility to pursue the perpetrator. And I want to thank our officers for diligently doing their best to rise to that responsibility. I'll make this analogy about a citizen oversight board. Let's say you have a teenager and your nephew gets in trouble in a different state, so you put your own child on parole. That's what we're doing to our police department if we don't solicit input from the officers in question. The police are not our enemy, nor are they some faceless group. Police officers in this town who will be affected by the recommendations of this committee are not just police officers, but citizens of Laramie who are soccer coaches and parents and mentors and advocates. What sets them apart is they are people that run towards danger when they get the call. Last meeting, commenter Mr. Homer, sorry, my cat's in the screen, alluded to vulnerability and vulnerable people being disproportionately affected by policing. However, I truly believe that the police protect the most vulnerable among us, and that's the victims of crime. And those people are not here at this meeting or any meeting. And when I speak to officers, they talk about victims. We talk about mental health, and whenever I talk to police officers about their mental health and what keeps them up at night, they talk about victims of crime. So I don't presume that anyone who is suggested for this committee is an enemy either. In fact, I hope it can be a dialogue between those who wish to have changes and the police themselves. There's no problem with hearing community input on what policing should look like in Laramie. Programs like the STAR program in Denver and the CAHOOTS program in Oregon are excellent examples of embracing police officers and citizens by adding services that truly, truly benefit citizens. And I hope that like those communities, Laramie will be recognized for having a respectful relationship where citizens and the police department work together for the best outcome of all citizens. So I will reiterate that quote. It's time to start talking with the police and not at them. So that's my amendment. Under the section of membership, I would like to add 5 open seats for any current or retired Laramie law enforcement professional. To be truthful, I'm not sure they'll even come. Police officers are the strong and silent type. That's my amendment. Thank you.
Second.
Thank you.
A motion and a second. Discussion on the amendment from Councilor Stalder. And I will go to public comment for this, council members, as I'm sure you're expecting. Discussion on the amendment. Councilmember O'Doherty.
I think Councilor Stalder makes some excellent points. I think we have an excellent police department. I am interested in a conversation with rather than at. I'm not clear where you're putting this exactly though. So could you specify? So it would be
so that would be under the membership section, like 6 Laramie residents, 2 Laramie residents engaged in provision of social services, 7 institutional representatives. I think we changed this one, representatives for current police oversight, and then 5 seats for members of law enforcement.
Point of information, are we bringing the ad hoc committee membership up to 26?
Yes.
I'll withhold discussion on that.
Thank you. I know 21 is already a huge number. I just think it should be a conversation with everyone.
I appreciate that. Well, if the council will allow it, I'll just have this brief colloquy with Councilmember Stalder. My concern is more with an even number for approval of recommendations and so forth, more than it is the substance.
If the second is friendly, I would make that 6 members of law enforcement, and that would make it 27 total.
27. All right. So the second.
Second concurs.
Discussion on the amendment. Councilmember Harrington.
Mr. Mayor, I obviously, given the quote from Councilor Stalder, support this idea to some extent. I do not think I support 6 members. I would be open to a conversation for a smaller number, but that would bring the police representation on this board to 12. And that is just not a number that I'm necessarily comfortable with at this point. But I do think, given the mission of this ad hoc group and its intention to really bring to light the full conversation outside of these sort of 3-minute sound bites, I think it is well worth including more sworn officers on this committee.
Thank you, Councilmember Harrington. Councilmember Somerville, then I'm going to go to Vice Mayor Pierce. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do actually agree with Councilor Stalder. Maybe I went about it the wrong way the first time, adding the sheriff and the UWPD chief. But I do agree with some additional law enforcement representation. The question I have, and this is born from kind of previous conversations from the recommendations from the city manager's office, there was one municipal sworn officer non-command as a liaison. And so I wonder, could we ask the city manager and maybe the chief where they feel that would be appropriate?
Councilmember Somerville, I'm glad you asked that question because that was going to be a step I wanted to take, which was to get our city management to weigh in on this. City manager, chief, if you'll just bear with us just a moment, I'm gonna go to the vice mayor because I think she may have had a similar inquiry and I just want to get it taken care of now. Vice Mayor Pierce.
Yeah, my inquiry is similar. I like where Councilor Stalder is going with this as well. I'm like Councilor Harrington, a little concerned with the number because based on my count, I'm seeing 6 plus. I think there are already 3, maybe 2. And I'd really like to hear from the police chief and our city manager in terms of being able to manage that number at the same time. In a meeting, I don't know. But I do like the intent.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Pearson. What I'd also like the city manager and the chief to talk to us about is any other concerns about, first operationally, the logistics of that. Although I do think it's been suggested that it be open to either current or retired police officers. I think that was the amendment. But if there's any concern from the management about current, an expanded number of current officers serving, or any other thoughts about that. Thank you, council, and thank you, city management, for waiting for us to kind of get that all together. So whoever, I saw the chief raised a hand, but I believe the city manager turned her camera on. Whoever would like to address this first. City manager?
Thanks, Mayor. I'll start. Council, I have no input on having officers or how many on the committee. I think I've told you previously, and of course I've recommended that the committee include sworn officer representatives. So from my understanding of the amendment, you would have, are we at 6? You would have 6 voting members that are current or retired law enforcement officers. And that would be in addition to the members already in the resolution or recommended, which includes 1 member of police sworn management, the police, a member of police non-sworn management, and a member of police legal management. So those 3. Then As recommended, there is a municipal sworn officer non-command position as a liaison. You could certainly move that to a voting position if you'd like that position to be one of your police officer representatives, and then the police chaplain. So in total, I think that does bring to 12. Totally your call. As far as logistics and scheduling, if we were to have positions for multiple officers, the chief can address it more detailed in a more detailed fashion, but certainly it'd be challenging to schedule meetings when all 5 or 6 of those officers could be off shift, but I know we could make it work within reason, and I'll let the chief address that. I wanted to talk just briefly before I pass it off to Chief Stalder. My anticipated process for establishing the municipal sworn officer non-command representative is that we would, working with the city's Human Resources Department, we would literally have an election of sworn officers and let them choose from their ranks who that person will be, as opposed to management handpicking that position. So the way I see it, I would recommend the same process for any seats that you reserve for sworn law enforcement officials. If they are on staff with the city, if they are retired, then I think we would just select those folks as a matter of the nominating committee's activities to vet applications and recommend a slate of candidates there. Did I answer all your questions? And if so, or if not, I'm sure Dale can help.
Let's do it this way. Any questions for anything that the city manager touched on before we turn it over to the chief for additional comments? All right, Chief Stalder, please.
Mayor and Council, a couple of points. The first point is, if you want more or fewer police officers on this ad hoc committee, that's council's pleasure, and I wouldn't go for or against that. But I guess I have an overriding concern here that I'm kind of on the fly trying to put into play here, is that the resolution sets out that this committee, whether it's 21 or 22 or 27 or 227 people, is there to form an advice to the council in 6 months or 12 months, whatever the council makes a decision on. And so I'm having a little bit of heartburn over the voting member part of it, because are we voting on consensus? Are we voting on what this ad hoc committee wants to do? Because when my officers get put in this position to vote, that's where they're going to become hesitant, because their jobs, their livelihoods are on the line on how they vote or how they align themselves against the other members of this committee. And I guess I never envisioned the committee as voting members rather than consensus or bringing a bunch of ideas after this 6 or 12 months to council to sift through, decide what they want to do with. So I think that's my bigger concern, because I'm not sure that if I have 2 or 12 or 6 or whatever officers that are willing to put themselves in a position of voting on one way or another when their livelihoods could be in jeopardy. So, and I know, city manager, I may be throwing that back in the wrong direction, but I'm a little bit confused on that, because the resolution seems to me to be advise council, not vote on council. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Stalder. I think you just raised an interesting point that I want the council to consider as they make further comments and decide on votes for both this amendment and this resolution as amended. And that's this. We actually haven't outlined a process, and I'm not sure that we should, for the ad hoc committee to determine how they want to forward what to the council to ultimately make a decision about incorporating. And maybe we need to leave that to them. But the chief raises an interesting point here. And I see a lot of hands popping up. And Councillor Harrington, if you'll just bear with us on this question, City Manager.
Mayor and Council, I would note for you that, and I understand what Dale is asking, but I think if you look under the purpose section in section 1, the city attorney and I, and of course he's not with us this evening, but we had sort of vetted this out because every working group, every committee has to have some parameters for how they will conduct their proceedings. So in that purpose section, it says, at the first meeting, the working group will elect a chair and vice chair and establish bylaws for the conduct of their meetings subject to approval of the city clerk and the city attorney to make sure that those rules are appropriate from a parliamentary and a legal standpoint. I don't envision, nor do I think the city attorney envisioned, or the clerk as our parliamentarian, that they need to vote on every single recommendation. An advisory body like this typically comes up with a slate of recommendations, and then maybe at the very end, they will take a vote to make sure that when they submit that slate of recommendations to city leadership, that you all know that each person had an opportunity to vote on the slate, but not on every single recommendation. I mean, we could see dozens and dozens of recommendations from this committee, or we could see one. But there needs to be some way of recording that the membership all had an opportunity to weigh in. So I hope maybe that assuages some of the chief's concerns and explains a little bit about how the city attorney and I envision the group proceeding. This is not really unusual. It's very similar to what our other advisory bodies do.
Thank you, City Manager. Thank you, Councillor Somerville, for reminding me that I was muted. I think I had Councillor Harrington up and then Councillor Somerville. So Councillor Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm curious, part of the intention of this ad hoc committee really is to serve in a sort of a distilled down version of community meetings. And I'm curious if, you know, we're outlining 3 community meetings. Obviously, those are with the broader community. I don't know. I mean, it's a bit of a, it's not really a friendly amendment per se, but I'm curious if hosting those meetings, hosting separate from those meetings, but more community meetings with law enforcement directly for their input. And I would like them to be able to present to this board and anything that they feel like is valuable and germane to the effort. But I'm wondering if that would sort of appease the intention of Councillor Stalder's amendment, or if it really would need to maintain that sort of number of sworn officers in a voting position.
All right, that's a question, and so we'll get back and allow for a response there. Thank you, Councillor Harrington. Councilmember Somerville.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mine would be a question as well, based on the feedback that we heard from the city manager and the chief. I certainly support having some additional police officer input into this group, but I certainly don't want to put them in an awkward position. So I guess I would ask Councillor Stalder if she had another suggestion or how she felt, and yeah, I guess that's my question on whether we want to go forward with this or if we want to tweak it a little bit.
Thank you, Councilmember Somerville. Chief Stalder, I see you've raised your hand. Go ahead.
Mayor and Council, I wasn't trying to say that my guys would be uncomfortable. I think that the city manager absolutely clarified the position that they would be in, and it's my belief, you know, just based on talking to my people, that there would be sufficient interest to have a number of people sit on this ad hoc committee, primarily to provide their input and their expertise, but also to channel that information about what's gained from the ad hoc committee back to their peers to further that conversation
in successive meetings going forward that I think would be valuable to the group if in fact council makes a determination that moving forward with an ad hoc committee is the right direction to go. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Councilor Stalder, I have some questions too about this. First, I think, although I believe this is a good idea, I think what we've heard in the past is that people that might want to be critical in a way that might be constructive for the city and the police department are going to be unlikely to want to share those views and criticisms that we can build on if they're talking to a group of 12 current or former law enforcement associated individuals. And I don't know how we get around that. But that's a concern I have. I'm not necessarily saying that that's going to make me vote one way or another on the amendment, but I know we've heard that and it's been reiterated to us. And then my other question is just about the size of the committee, and 27 people. That's a really large committee. Now I know we have talked about a facilitation process, and I think that would be absolutely critical with a group of 27 people. But we've also heard criticism about the city expending funds for facilitation. So, every idea that comes across that seems to strengthen some aspect of this seems to make another aspect of it more difficult. But if you would like to go through any of that with us now, that's great. I don't know if you want to go to public comment and maybe see if that helps us foster any further ideas. And I see the city clerk looking for recognition.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. In reading through membership in your resolution, if this amendment is proposed, it then takes out most of that section right below where it says application disclosures will be sufficient. Underneath of that, it talks about police department and members in their household and no active employees of the city may serve. So that section of the resolution would then need to be removed in order for those members to serve.
Thank you, City Clerk.
Point of information, isn't that for just the community/resident representation, not like this would be a different category?
This would be adding. So
is it a new category?
I believe so.
Okay.
City Clerk,
thank you for that clarification.
That was a very, very good point to run over in case people were interpreting it one way or another. Councilmember Gabriel, I want to keep giving the floor back to Councilor Stalder here, but I want people to get their questions and comments forward. So go ahead, Councilor Gabriel.
Thank you. Perhaps what we should do is maybe set up a work session or two with the chief of police, some of his subordinates and mental health experts, and try and come to a consensus on what kind of problem we're trying to fix, because that's in my mind right now. I don't see it. We've had very few complaints with the LPD. What are we trying to do here? Now we're up to 25, 26 people on this committee. All this, the more I hear, the more it doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, we could simplify this process, get some people together, some experts, and have a nice couple of work sessions, and then come to a consensus on what we're trying to fix. I don't get it. Thank you.
Councilmember Stalder, did you want to go to public comment or do you want to address issues now?
I'm okay with public comment first.
Sure.
Yep.
Okay. Comment on the amendment. I'll just go in order of who's put hands up first. Lindsay Conyers up first. When you're admitted into the room, you have the floor. Go right ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I agree with Councilmember Gabriel. I think this is, it's a loose, wild Mustang at this point. Like, everybody's running loose in 27 different directions, literally, with 27 members on a committee that everybody disagrees on what needs to happen. So it seems to me that with this much confusion about how the board's going to look, it seems to me that everybody should just vote no until we can come up with a better plan. This is not something that this community needs. It is not something that this police department needs. And that is evidenced by the fact that there is no evidence. There's no evidence that says we need this. So we just need to, enough with the talk and get to the vote and vote no, please. Listen to the people. We have tried to tell you over and over and over what we want. And people have talked. And regardless of the semantics of our petition, it does not, just because we mentioned a civilian oversight board on one and an ad hoc committee on the other, we're opposed to all of this. I don't care what your semantics or your grammar is saying to you. We're opposed to this. Our police department doesn't need this. I think that the police department has by far and above been open and willing to have conversation with people. We don't need this, and if people need to talk to the police department, they can do that. Chief Stalder is amazing at talking to his public and to his community. He is open. He has an open door to his office. Go in and talk to him, and he will listen to you. He wants to listen. The Laramie Police Department is ready to listen. They don't need this board to come up and have people listen to them. I agree with Councilor Gabriel, and if it needs to happen, it needs to be a smaller board with just, the elected people from Ivinson Hospital and the mental health community coming together and seeing what this community needs, not the civilian oversight, ad hoc, whatever. I thank you for your time.
Thank you. Members of the public, I'm going to respectfully request that you try to tailor your comments to the proposed amendment. For instance, just so people don't think I'm being unfair, if you're opposed to the whole thing, then you're opposed to the amendment and any improvements to it because you're opposed to the whole thing. A comment like that's instructive for us, but let's try to tailor it more or less to the amendment. Moving in order, next, I think we've got Mr. Matamore. Let's let Mr. Matamore into the room and give him a second to unmute the phone. And whenever you're ready, you've got the floor.
I believe I'm on now. I have, yes, as quite a few of you know already, I have always been in favor of Councilor Stalder's amendment of having more police input into this. As to your concerns about this, Mr. Mayor, you can take my word for it that any member of the Laramie Police Department can sit and listen to criticism with great equanimity. You have people go around and spit in their faces. They could face down people with guns, and they could deal with crazy people. I think that they're more than capable of engaging in rational conversation, even with the most, egregious comments and personal attacks. So I think they're more than capable and more than ready to deal with people providing criticism in an open public forum. I just wish that members of ACOP and LHRN would also understand that. So I think this would not be a problem, the possibilities that you brought up. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, moving down the list. Next we have Tracy Rosenlund, and when we admit her into the room, go right ahead. You've got the floor.
Hello, Mayor and members of Council. Thank you again for allowing me to speak. I wanted to say that I was adamantly opposed to Councilor Stalder's amendment to add a number of law enforcement representatives to this working group. I will say that personally, I was disappointed to learn about the law enforcement representation on the working group, but I could understand it. And so I wanted to move forward with this as it was proposed for the sake of hearing more voices in our community. In addition, there is already law enforcement representation on this board that have been outlined in the resolution. We're not leaving law enforcement out of this conversation. As stakeholders, I can see how they should have a seat at the table, but this excessive representation will silence the vote of the community members. This instills a similar structure to the current complaint system that creates intimidation and limits members of the public's willingness to speak openly and freely if it counters the typical police narrative. That would be true of members of this working group as well. If there are nearly 12 members out of 26, that is almost half of the composition of the group. When compared to the representation of the rest of this working group, it would disproportionately amplify local law enforcement's voice and substantially reduce the voices of the public, as well as mental health professionals, representatives from UW, and other members of the community. It is important to have them as liaisons. I believe that the number of law enforcement representatives on the original recommendation is far more appropriate than ballooning this group into something that is a heavy-handed approach to represent what has already been represented. It is also less likely for the working group to be able to explore meaningful change that would fundamentally shift policing practices that would fundamentally shift what their recommendations might be surrounding policing practices, which is what our community has cried out for years. This is not a new conversation. We're talking specifically about a working group here. However, this resulted from years and quite a while that people have expressed this. Just because everybody has not shown up tonight does not mean that support for this has waned. Our community has expressed it loudly, and just because they may not all be here representing tonight does not mean that they have changed their perception. Additionally, I believe the community forums would provide any additional law enforcement officers with the ability to give feedback to the working group to be incorporated as necessary. And I think this is a much more appropriate avenue to use than to weight the working group towards being heavily law enforcement. So I would suggest and implore you to vote no on that amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Next up, we have, I think, Mr. Martin, and let's let him in. And when he's in, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, City Council. I would like to speak on and in favor of the amendment because police representation on any board of the type that you are proposing can't be ignored if you want the public's support in the long run. You have a problem with 27 members on the committee, then cut down the whole darn thing. Don't eliminate the voices of law enforcement, whether they are active duty or retired, doesn't matter. Their opinions are probably much more accurate about law enforcement than the last speaker demonstrated with her comments. I think that we need to, in the long run, create a dialogue that allows the law enforcement in this community to be managed professionally without being micromanaged by people who don't have a clue what law enforcement is about. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Next, we've got Mr. Newman. Let's let Mr. Newman into the room. And when you see yourself on the screen, you've got the floor. You've got the floor.
Hi there, Mayor and councilors. Thank you for giving me the time to speak. I'm just going to speak on the amendment real quick. I do agree with the mayor's comments addressing the possible use or the possible issue of citizens being uncomfortable sharing their possible ideas for the COB in front of 12 LPD officers. So I oppose this amendment. I would also like the counselor that introduced this amendment to withdraw it and recuse themselves from further conversation concerning this bill. Although it is debatable as to whether this counselor stands to benefit financially from this measure, I think it's become more than clear that they're morally compromised on this issue due to their personal relationships. And thank you. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Moving through the comment list. Next, we have Michael Funk, because I believe that other number is simply Mr. Well, let me check with the city clerk. Is that Mr. Matamore's number next on the list there? Okay, then let's admit that individual in, and if you could just please identify yourself for the record, and then you've got the floor. Please go ahead. *6 to unmute, and you're on. If you could just please identify yourself for the city council.
Sorry about that. Wasn't looking at my screen. I'm on the phone. My name is John Roos. I spoke at last week's session, so I have talked on this before. I would like to say I oppose this amendment. I believe the inclusion of law enforcement as it currently stands is already quite the compromise. As a previous caller stated, if this does go through, that would put it up to nearly half law enforcement, which is just, that's ridiculous. I also expressed concerns with the size of the committee in general. If it does move up to a large amount, up to 26, you need to keep this stuff concise. You can't have too many people, otherwise you're never going to get anything done. And if this does go through, we'll just have an issue of government being ineffective and causing people to lose trust in it. Furthermore, I think the concerns regarding law enforcement involvement, there's already a liaison for the police, or for the rank and file officers. I think any address or concerns they may have may be routed through them rather easily. And I do like the idea of more working sessions with the community as well to help get more officer involvement, but I do not support this amendment as is. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we have Michael Funk. Let's let Mr. Funk in the room, and when he's on the screen, he has the floor. Go right ahead.
Hi, I am also opposed to this amendment. I would like to echo a lot of what the last couple speakers said, especially the call for Councilor Stalder to recuse herself from, or first to withdraw this amendment, and then also to recuse yourself from further discussion regarding and voting regarding pretty much anything about either a citizens oversight board, if that comes to be a thing one day, or what we're talking about today. Again, because of her personal relations and her clear conflicts of interest, which have even been outlined to the point of business relation not being served any court summons because of this.
That's not related, and we're going to need to ask people to not use specifics. We all know who you're talking about, but don't be specific. Please continue.
Okay. All right. More related specifically to this amendment. I personally attended, as well as a lot of other people, a bunch of Black Lives Matter protests this summer, and LPD consistently, when people got aggressive with us, when people came and brandished their guns to us, when people came and tried to run us over with their vehicles, LPD had until that point, at every time, been closely surveilling our marches. But right at that point, when someone started getting aggressive with us, they immediately got out of there. There was not an officer in sight. There was not that drone in sight. And I really do not trust any of these LPD officers because they were all involved in that. And I do not support the inclusion of any more LPD officers in this working group. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Funk, and I apologize for interjecting into your comment. I don't like to do that to people, but sometimes we need to remind people about the procedures that we allow. Next up, we have Mr. Harris. Let's let Billy Harris into the room. Mr. Harris, you have the floor.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak again. I want to first second Tracy Rosenlund's previous comments. I strongly discourage you from adding 6 or any number more sworn officers to this working group. The purpose of civilian oversight is external public presence in our interpretation and practice of policing. The power and privilege that police officers hold will only be defended by any police presence on this committee and the committee's potential to establish any meaningful police oversight. Their voting or consensus present is harmful to genuine critique, insight, and action. I believe this amendment should be withdrawn, and Councillor Stalder should recuse herself from voting, as this amendment is clearly displaying a conflict of interest. Oh, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Next up, we have Rob Piper. Let's let Mr. Piper into the room, and you have the floor.
Mr. Mayor, council members, I appreciate the opportunity to speak a second time. I hope not to be too long-winded. I think that the public comment that we're receiving demonstrates that folks who are proponents of this concept feel free to speak their minds and to criticize the police. And I don't think that the presence of officers would change that in the least. I also notice that when dissenting viewpoints are added to the discussion, there seems to be an impulse to silence them. I'm not certain how you have a discussion with oneself. As a second career, I had the opportunity to attend law school, and one of the principles that we kind of teach there is an idea that won't withstand scrutiny is a poor idea not worth consideration. I think that if we're going to have an honest discussion, it must be an open and honest discussion. Councilperson Stalder's amendment to this ordinance would actually change my mind completely. I would be in support of this. I think that you'd find that if you added law enforcement, you might be surprised that there's a lot of consensus. I don't believe that most police officers want to deal with mental health calls. We're not trained for it. I believe Chief Stalder has made that point. I think that the addition of police officers would help to reinforce that, and contrary to undermining trust, would probably enhance it as we realize that we're not all that different. I thank you for the opportunity to speak a second time and for your consideration.
Thank you, Mr. Piper. Each new amendment provides members of the public another opportunity to speak, so please feel free to raise your hand and contribute to the discussion. And thank you for all the time that all of you are contributing to local government this evening. Up next, we have Mr. Van Fleet. Let's let Mr. Van Fleet in, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. For those that don't know, my name is Jeff Van Fleet. I'm a local attorney. I do criminal defense, and previously I was a law enforcement officer for nearly 20 years. And I think that this group that you're proposing is excellent, and I think that having a large group makes it really difficult to come to a consensus. However, the perfect group would include every law enforcement officer, because from my experience with Laramie PD and my own experience in law enforcement, the officers here at Laramie PD have done an excellent job with the chief. I have watched videos where officers have engaged with people with mental health issues and done an excellent job, better than I would have done in my time. But I know, as a person who was once a law enforcement officer, I didn't always know about the resources or the community needs. I don't know if adding 6 is going to help, but I think whatever you do, if you add 6 or you add 66, I think the officers are going to be receptive to what you have to say. In my own experience in these type of groups, officers don't tend to try to quell the community input. In fact, they're there to learn. And so if you need to add 6 more so that we can expand the impact of the group, I think that's an excellent idea, and I would support the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, we have Linda Devine. Let's let Linda Devine into the room. And you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I oppose the amendment. I think that there are enough law enforcement officers on this ad hoc committee. With respect to my colleague, I have a little bit of a disagreement with him. I don't think that adding more would be productive. I believe what it will actually do is intimidate people, whether it's intended or not. I can tell you from my experience in working with the clients that I have, many are concerned to speak truthfully and in front of law enforcement. I'm not saying that they have anything that they're intentionally being demeaning or threatening. It's just that perception. You already have 6 on here, I believe. And this is supposed to be a community forum, not a just strictly law enforcement. So I would oppose the amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council.
Thank you. Call for public comment. Last call for public comment on the amendment. We have Mr. and Mrs. Reese. I'm not sure. Screen name Rex. Let's let them in the room. You have the floor. Rex or Sandy, you've got the floor. We can't hear you. Council members, I'm not hearing anyone. Are you? *6 to unmute if you're on the phone, or you can move the mouse around to pull up the menu on the bottom if you're on a device, if you're on a phone or computer. But we can't hear you. Let's try it again. Let's see if we can unmute, and if we can't, we're going to have to move on. Looks like you're unmuted, but I still can't hear any voices. We're going to have to move on. We'll see if we can provide another opportunity. Contact the city clerk if you're able to resolve the audio issue, and we'll see if we can fit you in. Public comment. Last call for public comment, with the exception of what I just addressed. Last call for public comment on this amendment. Seeing none, closing public comment on this amendment. City Council. Councilmember O'Doherty, I see that Chief Stalder has raised his hand. Let's go to Chief Stalder, Council. Go ahead.
Mayor, I just want to clarify that while it's Councilmember Stalder is my daughter, for 2.5 years, even after I told her that she was making a mistake doing what she did to run for council, and I would expect laughs from all of you over that. What I told her was that our relationship when it came to council and my work relationship was totally separate. And council has to know that her amendment and discussions on this matter have never been had personally or otherwise. And I think that when members of the public express a conflict of interest or anything else, that's inappropriate, because in my profession, after 40 and a half years as a police officer and the way that I raised my daughter, these things are separate, and professional and personal are kept separate. And I just want council and the public who's watching to understand that, because this is a personal matter for me at this point. When my daughter's attacked for a conflict of interest, because it doesn't attack me, it attacks her. And I felt last summer, and I feel right now, that I needed to make that public statement. And I'll leave it at that, but that was important for me to say.
Thank you, Stalder. I can't imagine how difficult this situation is for yourself. And for my part, I believe you 100% and completely. The reason I didn't laugh at the joke is I've been on the council for 7 years, and I think it's it's a very difficult thing to do, to balance all these community concerns. As I said, I have no doubt about anything that you just stated. I think the problem comes in where, unfortunately, council, I don't know how we can get everyone else that might not be as inclined to believe Chief Stalder, to believe Chief Stalder. And I don't know that there's anything that we can do about that, but I do. But I also know that there are people that, no matter what is said, are not going to, and I don't know what we can do about that. But thank you, Chief, for making that, for that point. And again, the council, we acknowledge that this is a difficult situation. And I hope the public heard that it's difficult to hear some of those comments. And I would encourage, again, when we make comments to the city council about policy, that we not identify people personally. I know that there are going to be members of the public that don't understand how they can make the comments they need to make. Without doing that, I would suggest that they contact other members of the public that they have heard do that effectively tonight, without getting into the territory of personalities. Please, it's just a request. We can't make you do anything. We won't try. It's a respectful request. Council members, on the amendment. Councilmember Stalder.
Thank you, Mayor. I hope it was evident from the chief's reaction to the amendment that this is not something we had spoken about previously. I truly believe that a police input on this committee is important for Section C of the resolution to build understanding, effective communication, and trust between the police department and the community. And I will bring up a conversation that I had with a police officer after the resolution last summer. And I said, "How do you feel about that?" And he said, "I didn't watch the city council meeting because I spent the entire day looking for a 3-year-old in a culvert." And I think that's the perspective that's important from the police department on this committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Stalder. Again, Council, we're faced with the challenge about how to balance all of the important perspectives, and I am becoming rapidly less certain what the right direction for that is. Councilmember Harrington, help us out. Maybe you have something you can add.
Yeah, I wish I had that easy solution, Mr. Mayor. Councilor Stalder, I'm curious. I remain uncomfortable with the 6 members because I think that is I think that's more representation than is given to any other party. And for that reason, I would support your amendment if it was 2 officers, just to be very clear about sort of where I'm at on the number. And one of those officers being the liaison position, moving them to a voting member. I would be open to that and supportive of that amendment, because I do believe there needs to be police officers if what we're doing is really hosting a conversation through this working group to distill down what the right solution is. For me, that is the number that works. That is adding 1 member to the committee, but 2 voting members are added. I don't know if you are open to that as a friendly amendment or not, but that's where I'm at, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, Councilmember Harrington. We're going to give Councilmember Stalder a chance to respond to your question, but I was going to go to Councilmember Cumby first, but it looks like she's willing to wait. So on the question of the friendly, whether or not that's considered a friendly amendment or whether or not we'd like to consider that a second amendment, Councilmember Stalder.
I'm happy to hear from Councilor Cumby first.
Thank you. Councilmember Cumby, thank you for your patience. It's hard to navigate discussion.
And Councilor Stalder, I'm speaking as a mental health professional that has conducted many groups, and as a researcher has done focus groups all over the state of Wyoming. And I think that 6, I did the math on it, and 6 brings the balance up to just under 45% police representation on the group. But I think that Councilor Harrington's suggestion of 2 keeps it at about 34%. And I'm looking at this group as law enforcement officers, professionals, and citizens, and a third. So 2 would make the representation more equal, and I have concerns about 6, and I don't think that I could support that because I think it unbalances the group. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Cumby. Other further discussion and comments on this amendment before we go back to Councilmember Stalder? Councilmember Stalder. Thank you for letting Councilmember Cumby speak to the point.
If the second is friendly, I am okay with 2 members.
And I have no idea who the second was. City Clerk, you? Oh, it's Councilmember Schuster. Thank you, Councilmember Schuster. All right. The amendment's been modified by friendly amendment. I think we need to vote on this, but if there's commentary, City Manager.
Mayor, I'm sorry. For my edification, could I clarify the 2 positions are in addition to the officer liaison stated in the resolution already, or inclusive of the liaison?
Mr.
Stalder, Councilmember Stalder, as you understand it.
Thank you. So the liaison would be a voting member plus 1 additional member.
Councilmember Harrington, Cumby, and Schuster. It looks like everyone that's weighed in on this. All right, City Manager, are we clear? Okay. All right. Vice Mayor Pierce.
So just help me with my math. Does that give us an even number or an odd number of total committee members?
22, I think.
Okay, so I would like to make a friendly amendment to change it, instead of 2, just change it to 3. Sorry, but I think odd is good.
Councilmember Somerville. It looks like the sponsors and everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I actually believe that moving the liaison and adding 1 more member gives us 23 voting members on the committee.
Okay.
So we would be odd with that. That was my math.
Vice Mayor Pierce, what do you want to do about that?
That's fine, as long as we remain odd.
Okay.
So.
And Council, quit relying on the mayor to count and get the Roberts rules correct, because it's obviously not happening tonight. Any other comment on this, or would you like to go to a vote?
Go to a vote.
Thank you. Oh, but Councilmember O'Doherty likes to wait until the very last
Always. I
Councilmember
just want to
O'Doherty.
say that the opportunity to have people speak anonymously, we could offer that in a different way, and the commission or this committee, I mean, will somehow find a way to get anonymous input that respects the police officers, so you don't just have somebody ganging up on their neighbor because they don't like their dog, and respects the if somebody wants to remain anonymous and make a complaint, we could still create that avenue so that this isn't an either or situation. So I'm going to vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Doherty, and for putting up with me teasing you a little bit. After all, I give myself a little bit of crap, so I have to bring a few other people. And City Manager, it occurs to me that the email setup that we've put in place could facilitate anonymous input to our ad hoc committee. Those individuals could email comment to be reviewed by the ad hoc committee on topics and remain anonymous. That doesn't seem like that would be a difficult task. Would you like to confirm that for us?
That is correct, Mayor. Yes. Also, through our existing web portal, we do accept anonymous input as well. So, yes.
Okay. So we could follow a similar format to that, and we probably want to encourage people that felt like they needed that anonymity to use that process, and so that's one tool that we'd have in place through this resolution. Council members, okay. City Clerk, can we have a roll call for a vote to this amendment?
Gabriel.
No.
Harrington.
Yes.
O'Doherty.
Yes.
Cumby.
Yes.
Schuster.
Yes.
Stalder.
Yes.
Somerville.
Yes.
Pierce.
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 8 yeses and 1 no, Your Honor.
That motion carries. Now we're on to the main motion as amended. And we are at that point where we need to start focusing up. Council members, I'd like to give you another opportunity to weigh in here. I don't know how much more discussion is going to be helpful for us making a decision, but it's a very, very difficult topic. So further amendments, further discussion, further questions or clarifications. Councilmember O'Doherty.
I just want to point out, and it's clear from some of the comments we've been getting tonight, that part of the problem is not so much with the Laramie Police Department, but that we have so many law enforcement departments here, and I think members of the community don't know who is policing them, and students, they could be policed by everybody. So it's important to hear their voices. That's why we're including the university. I suspect that a lot of the complaints are not about our LPD, and I suspect that a lot of the suggestions are things that Chief Stalder has already implemented. So I think it's a good way to just kind of hone what's working well and show that off and hear some suggestions. And if we hear about complaints, we can look into them. And I'd be willing to, well, I suspect that most of them are not from LPD officers. So I think it's a good opportunity to have a conversation, and that's what I've been wanting all along, is a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember O'Doherty. I can think of, I think, just off the top of my head, at least 5, and I know there's more because they were mentioned earlier tonight, law enforcement agencies that have jurisdiction in Albany County and the city of Laramie, both. Council members. I think Councilmember Gabriel brought up some points that are very, very interesting. In some ways, I think a better procedure might have been to try to figure out a way to have discussions to focus on what the concerns of the community actually are, and then decide what our approach was going to be. But we've invested an incredible amount of time in this process, and that's okay. It's important, but I wonder if we might. Council members, if I had the ability to make a motion, I think I might include some specifics about community forums regarding these issues, but I don't know if we want to do too much more with this right now, and there's nothing that would prevent us from requiring that or creating an opportunity for that in the future. Councilmember Harrington.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I heard what Councilor Gabriel was saying as well, but I do want to maybe add just my opinion of that. I think we certainly tried. Of course, there was a pandemic and all of the limitations of a digital meeting that we were all grappling with in the midst of sort of a pretty chaotic summer. I think it's pretty unfortunate, in my opinion, that I was trying to listen really carefully to the public comment this evening. We certainly received a lot of petition signatures and other things. And while it probably comes as no surprise that I'm going to support this to most of you and members of the public, I regret that the sort of nuance of the conversation has disappeared, and instead it's become, do you support the chief or do you not support the chief? I really regret that that's where this conversation has gone in the public comment, because I think that's unfair as a characterization of the conversation that we are having. I have had an opportunity for the first year and a half of my first term. I came on in the same cohort as Councilor Stalder. And in that first year and a half, I served with the chief on the Town and Gown Association. And, I think while there are, because of this sort of like simplified characterization of the debate, I think that sort of the ability to both support moving forward with this ad hoc committee and increasing transparency has somehow been pitted as opposition to respect for the chief. And I just want to say, on the record, that I do respect the chief a great deal in the Laramie Police Department. And, every interaction I've had with them has been great. I have had, over the last couple of years, occasions in sort of tense moments to interact with police officers that likely did not have any idea who I was. So they certainly weren't behaving differently in front of a council member. And I was impressed on every occasion. So, I just, I hate to ramble here, Mr. Mayor, but I did just, I wanted to add that. And then I think it's also, important to note that the resolution that we adopted in June, that we unanimously adopted in June, I think that's an important consideration here as well. It really outlined 4 items. And getting back to my note about respect for the chief, I think you will notice 3 of those items in there are items that I knew through my work on the Town and Gown Association with the chief that were valuable to him. They were 3 things that he had talked about in that committee. And I was simply in my intention in including those was to support the chief in his efforts to increase, the use of mental health care professionals. That's not something new to the chief. And I think that was really valuable. But, I think while it acknowledged a lot of the work that the chief has been doing, I think the one component that has caused so much strife in our community was the next step forward. And so I think, the final thing I would just say is that the characterization that any of this process is, it's entirely meant to improve the trust between the community and the police department. So I have a really hard time understanding how that is a negative for the police department in any way. If they have more trust with the public, that's a win for everyone. So I'll continue to support this. I am happy to see Councillor Stalder's amendment on this. And then just as a final piece, I will join you in acknowledging that I do believe Councilmember Stalder and the chief have a very separate relationship on these things. When I first met Councillor Stalder as two candidates, that was literally the first story she told me, was about her dad telling her, why would you ever run for council? And then talking about their clear separation. So I would just acknowledge that that's been longstanding and is not something that's appeared during this conversation. So thank you for all the time, council. I know that was long, but I did feel like it was important to say and encourage a yes vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Harrington. That was totally appropriate. Other comments? Councilmember Schuster.
I have issues with a couple little things, and it's hard for me because I know that our city attorney is on vacation. So we cannot consult with him on this. So it's just frustrating that I'd like to ask him a bunch of questions, but cannot. So I'm not going to support this at this time. I know that there's going to be forums and other things, and hopefully the city attorney won't be on vacation at that time again. So that's my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Schuster. Appreciate that. Other comments? Council members, if you recall that when the original resolution that we've referenced a couple of times tonight came forward, that received a unanimous vote. And I think what's important about that is we want to communicate to the public that that's a result of the city council really wanting to try to respond to members of the community when they bring something forward. I'm going to just quickly, as quickly as I can, and with your approval, try my best. And I don't really particularly want to do this, but I feel obligated to do this, to summarize a couple of things and address a couple of reoccurring things. I have a great deal of respect for the council members that have put so much work into this, which either side of that, this issue they may come down on. And I think people do that work as a city council member in different ways, depending on their relationships in the community and how they've formed those relationships and the people in the community that they feel the most comfortable or perhaps feel most comfortable communicating to them. And we all do that. I know you all do it. Everybody here does it. And I just really want to thank you and the staff and the members of the public, most of all, whether you're for or against or you've proposed one thing or the other, it's not every community that gets the buy-in. And that's part of what makes this so incredibly difficult. I think all of the city leadership has thought about all of this and all of your opinions for a long time. When I say the city leadership, I mean the city council, I mean the city manager, I mean the city attorney, I mean the chief of police and other people that we could just continue to go on the list. The council has not decided on a definite path forward. I think a lot of the feedback and concern we've heard is that there's a predetermined outcome. I'm not sure how to address that any more than we have already tried. All I can say is that we have not. And as we have this meeting tonight, I don't think the vote on this resolution is even certain. I wouldn't be willing to tell you which way I thought it was going to turn out. There are a lot of choices that we can still make. Council requested that the city management in that original resolution present options. And when I say original resolution, I mean the one back in June of last year. We asked that they present options for the city council to consider, and they did that. And then after receiving community input from the meeting where those options were presented, the emphasis seemed to be on further investigation with a strong cross-section of expertise and members of the community. So the staff and council has moved closer now to creating an ad hoc committee and look at possibilities for community involvement with decisions regarding policing policies. We've heard from other members of the public since then that no further action should be taken. They're opposed to further discussion of the topic. They don't believe that there's a problem. Fair enough. I also want to repeat that the council has not surrendered any control to this committee whatsoever. It's being formed to make detailed suggestions which the council can accept, reject, or modify. Only the council will determine what, if any, suggestions we choose to move forward with finally. The citizens of Laramie will also have an opportunity to share their own ideas on how and if we do that. On a more general note, and this was touched on a little bit by the city manager, but I think it needs to be emphasized again, many citizen boards and commissions are given large amounts of responsibility by elected officials, though the membership of those boards and commissions are not themselves elected. They make decisions about land use and regulation and millions of tax dollars for the airport, for recreation. I could go on. And I can't recall occasions when people in elected office have been told that by empowering those boards and commissions to do that, they're abandoning their responsibility. I don't believe that's the case. And this seems very much like a very convenient criticism that fits the current arguments on one side of this discussion. I'll give you an example about why I've concluded that. In May of 2019, an ad hoc committee was proposed to the county government and carefully considered, but then shelved. And it wasn't shelved over concerns about accountability to the elected officials, but because of insurance and liability issues with that insurance. And no one at the time seemed to worry about the unelected operatives of the insurance industry directing public policy, but I assure you, members of the public, they absolutely do. They absolutely do. The sheriff at the time stated, and I quote from the Boomerang newspaper article, May 21st, 2019, "Were it up to me, the information that the 12 people who sat on the grand jury were able to see and hear should be available to all of our citizens." No one voiced concern with that idea. So I wonder what's changed, really. Is it because we had groups of protesters that said unfriendly things and critical things to the police and the city council? I hope that's not the reason, and I hope that's not all it takes for people to start questioning their commitment to local elections and self-government. That would be a sad state of affairs. Whether someone is for or against any policy, people have a civic responsibility to let discussion and debate happen and not to shut it down through whatever means they can. Citizens committee groups have a long and valuable history, and to attack them to me seems like an attack on a bedrock principle of local government. And this will not be an ad hoc committee of just citizens. As we discussed at length tonight, it will include professionals from the police department. This brings up a second point. Under Wyoming law, no community-based board, whether it's a future citizen oversight board for the police department that may or may not be considered, whatever form it takes, under Wyoming law, they're not going to have the authority to fire police officers, to examine individual confidential personnel records, or threaten anyone's career prospects. The council does not have the power to change that, and I'm not sure that we would want the power to change that either. In the event that an LPD officer fails to comply with existing policy, systems are currently in place to discipline, or if necessary, terminate that officer. When these officers are hired, systems are also in place to screen for and select LPD officers that meet an incredibly high standard. These include psychological screenings, scrutinization of social media activity, and minimum extensive process designed to identify only the very best, safest people interested in the job. It's not perfect, but it's far more than most people have to do for their job. Personally, I've had to go get background checks, including an FBI background check to work with vulnerable populations for jobs. And the process that LPD candidates go through is much more involved. I think it's reasonable to say that there is not a widespread community belief that the LPD is a badly flawed department. And that belief does not exist among the members of the city council. I think it's also reasonable to say that there's not a widespread belief that there is nothing else that should be done to improve and strengthen the community's relationship with the LPD. Many possible ideas exist that could be looked at. And the law is not only represented by law enforcement, as we understand. A lot of people in the legal community think this is worth doing. We've heard from several of them in different formats. That seems significant to me. The arguments that there is no reason to do this aren't convincing. Given the existing laws and regulations, it seems to me like there's very little, if anything, to lose by looking into new ideas and using a committee of community members, including members of the police department, and a lot to be gained by doing that. Very little to lose, but a lot to be gained. And that brings us to the very last thing I want to say. I appreciate everyone's patience. The council's been asked difficult questions for choosing to use a slow, deliberate, multi-step process to respond to all the concerns that we've heard. And we have the responsibility to respond to that. And that's why I ask you to just please continue to hear our statement here, my statement. We have listened carefully to many of you, and we need to give back a little bit of our attempt to process that. And I can't speak for every council member, and I won't pretend to, but I'll try to speak generally for enough of us to be fair. Consider that people have voted for members of the city council to make choices and to communicate community attitudes and examine issues. If you don't like us personally, we accept that. I accept that. It's part of the job, but it's still a job that has to be done. And you can disagree with how the job is done, and you certainly have options every election year to address that. But I'd ask that you hold your judgment until the process is finished. There is no predetermined outcome. And we're here because people voted for us to be here, and we ask that you just do that out of basic respect for the votes of other people. Basic respect is important. Everybody that lives in Laramie should be disturbed by the lack of respect and general contempt different parts of this community have frequently shown to each other over the course of the last year. It's not just concerning, it's frightening. Everything from, venomous comments on social media and all the trolling, screaming matches in the street, snide and dismissive attitudes expressed about each other, using politically charged and overgeneralized labels for each other, and much, much worse. It's all totally disturbing. The brandishing of weapons, the threatening actions, all of it's bad. And the harm that it can cause is extremely serious. And we all need to take stock of all that and decide where we want to go. And there's always a temptation to lay blame on one side for starting an argument or to blame another for escalating that argument. Just consider that citizens have both a group and an individual responsibility to resist that thinking. If you have a strong suspicion that there are dangerous motivations behind people's actions, make sure you exercise your own best judgment before you decide for sure. You don't have to be an expert on human beings to know that perspectives are personal and perspectives can also change. Resist generalizations and stereotypes. It isn't easy, but it's absolutely critical. Very soon, we may be in a situation where most people will feel more confident in more personal interactions again, and it couldn't come fast enough. Conversations and discussions need to happen, especially among people who disagree. Not here in government meetings, but definitely everywhere else. And thinking of each other as groups of people that are enemies instead of just other people is really important right now and moving forward. And we can only impact that problem locally. I don't know of anybody in Laramie that owns a cable TV network or has a social media monopoly. So the only way we're going to impact that is by talking to each other here in Laramie, and most importantly with people that we disagree with, whether it's a police officer or somebody that thinks the police should be defunded or some other position. Everybody has the same rights to their point of view, and we need to resist the impulse that somehow these are not people that are our fellow community members. And it's never too late to start. Never too late to start. We should start doing that now. And please, please, please do not misunderstand the message here. This is not meant to be a lecture. I don't want to lecture people. We don't get to lecture people. That isn't the point. It's truly and genuinely a respectful, sincere request from the city council. This is a city of around 35,000 families, friends, neighbors, teachers, students, customers, businesses, employers, employees. All of those people are equal citizens with the same set of rights under all of the law. And if you've lived here for 80 years, you live here. And you're all tax-paying citizens. You pay sales taxes and you pay property taxes either as owners or you pay it because it's factored into the cost of your rent. And that's the reality. Everyone has equal standing in the city. Laramie needs everyone, all of you, and Laramie needs you to respect each other and recognize individual dignity. Please That's a choice you've got to make individually for sure. But please make the right choice. The alternative is a bad one. And without respect, understanding, and dignity, no one is going to be able to say that they've achieved anything positive out of this entire process that started last summer. And finally, and lastly, no matter how this vote goes, from my point of view, make no mistake, on this entire issue, like a lot of other issues, there does not appear to be a clear majority. Don't kid yourself. You may not personally know anyone who disagrees with you, but the results of the protests, the petition drives, and last year's elections have provided us with a very mixed picture. Very mixed. And as a result, neither perspective should expect that we will dismiss one group's concerns in favor of another, either for or against. Maybe I'm wrong, but it seems like a lot of people are in the middle, and how to improve police and community relations and about how much of a problem that is doesn't seem particularly clear to me. Other council members addressed this a little bit in some of their comments as well. And that's problematic for me because I'm asked to, as a member of this council, cast a vote to start moving in a direction. It's very, very difficult. All of these views are going to play a role in shaping whatever choices are made in the future. And I would just submit to the members of the Laramie community, everyone, anything less would be a failure of local government to do what it's required to do, and that's to make decisions on behalf of the community and not in place of you. And so there's more work to be done on this. And however this resolution goes, it's not the end of the story, but it might be the end of the beginning. City Clerk, I'd like to get a roll call on this resolution, please.
Humby,
Yes.
Gabriel,
No.
Harrington,
Yes.
O'Doherty,
Yes.
Schuster,
No.
Stalder,
No.
Somerville,
Yes.
Pierce,
Yes.
Weaver.
Yes.
That's 6 yeses and 3 noes, Your Honor.
That motion carries. And that brings us to the end of our agenda items for this special meeting. Does anyone have anything else they need to bring before the council that's appropriate for this meeting?
I just got a text from someone in the community. It said no public comment before the final vote. So just thought I'd mention that I just got it sent to me. Have a good night. It's done.
Councilmember Schuster, I'll address that. We listened to public comment on the resolution overall at a special meeting that was devoted almost entirely to public comment. And we've heard public comment on every amendment proposal tonight. It's difficult to provide every opportunity that everybody would want, but there's going to be future opportunity for more public comment on any other decisions that the city council makes. Someone needs to move to adjourn the meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Without objection, the meeting's adjourned.